Good morning and welcome to the Landmarks Preservation Commission's public hearing and public meeting of August 6, 2024. We'll begin this morning by taking attendance. I'll ask our General Counsel, Mark Silverman, to call the roll.
Chair Carroll.
Here.
Vice Chair Bland.
Here.
Commissioner Chapin.
Here.
Commissioner Chen.
Here.
Commissioner Chu.
Here.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
Here.
Commissioner Goldblum. Commissioner Jefferson. Commissioner Lutfi.
Here.
Commissioner Master.
Here.
All right, good morning and welcome again to our public hearing and public meeting today, Tuesday, August 6th. This meeting is being held in our hearing room at 1 Center Street on the 9th floor. It is also being held via Zoom for anyone who would like to participate remotely and live streamed on our YouTube channel if you'd just like to watch the proceedings. We're going to begin this morning with our public meeting agenda for applications for work that have already had a public hearing and which are back today with revisions in response to comments made at the public hearing. And then there's one item on that public meeting agenda that was read into the record, and we'll be opening up the hearing for that. That's public meeting item number 5. And then we're moving to our agenda for public hearing agenda for new applications for work on designated properties. And with that, I'll turn it over to our Director of Preservation, Corey Harala.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Right, try this one out. We'll start today's Preservation Department agenda. All right, take 3. We're going to start today's Preservation Department public meeting agenda with item number 1, LPC 24-03527, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Queens, Block 8055, Lot 10, 23303 Bay Street in the Douglaston Historic District. This is a colonial revival style house built circa 1915. The application is to construct an addition and legalize the installation of a shed and fence. This was last presented at the public hearing of May 7th, 2024. No action was taken at that time. The staff will be presenting the revisions to the proposal.
Good morning, Commissioners. Lisa Schaefer, Preservation staff. This house has an addition. Well, actually, has an addition on each side, and the proposal was to add a second story onto the 1-story addition on the left. So the proposal that you saw in May is on the right side of the screen, and the revised is on the left. And when you saw this in May, you felt that the roof of the proposed addition was awkward in relation to the main house and the existing addition. And you asked that it be restudied. And you also asked that the fenestration on the side elevation be revised to be more in keeping with the symmetrical character of the house. The form of the addition's roof, as you can see, has been changed to a hip roof, which is what the existing addition on the other side of the house has. And also the eave level of the addition matches the eave level of the existing addition. And on the side elevation, the roof has been cut back so that it no longer is right up against the attic windows of the existing house. And the second floor windows on the addition have been centered over the existing first floor windows, and they've also been enlarged so that they match the size of other second floor windows on the house. And that's just the rear of the addition, again, showing the changes to the roof. And a photo montage with the existing on the right and the proposed on the left. And originally, when you saw this, part of the proposal was to legalize a shed and a fence that were installed without permits. That's going to be completely removed. So that's no longer part of the proposal. And those are the changes.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a very clear presentation. Are there any questions, Commissioners?
I'm sorry, I missed, what is being removed, Lisa?
Oh, the shed.
The entire shed?
Yeah, the shed and the fence, which were installed without permits, that will be completely removed.
All right. And just because I'm still having trouble getting in, Corey, can you just check to see if our remote commissioners have questions? Okay, great. So I think, thank you, Lisa, for such a clear presentation. I think the last time, as Lisa said, we saw this, we really focused on the roof line and the fenestration pattern and asked them to consider a hipped roof to better relate and to reconfigure the fenestration to also make it better relate to the building. And we did have concerns about that shed, so it's nice that that's being removed. Commissioner Chen, would you like to start with any comments?
Yeah, I think the concern last time was mostly with the shed and the correction, and I think this is appropriate.
Thank you, Commissioner Ginsburg.
Yeah, I think this is appropriate.
Okay, Commissioner Chu.
Yeah, I think this is an improvement since the previous proposal. I just recommend that, again, work with staff on the connections where the roof hits the existing structure because it is complicated.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner Masser.
Appropriate.
And Commissioner Lutfi, agree. And do our two remote commissioners have any additional comments?
No, it's appropriate.
Great,
No, it's appropriate.
thanks. Okay, so I think we have a consensus. Commissioner Chen, would you make the motion?
In the matter of LPC 24-03527, 233rd 03 Bay Street, Douglaston Historic District. The application is to construct an addition and legalize the installation of a shed and fence. Noting the building style, scale, materials, and details among the features that contribute to the special architectural historic character of the Douglaston Historic District, I recommend approval, finding that the construction of the proposed addition will not eliminate any significant architectural features, that adding a second story to the existing one-story wing setback from the front facade and lower than the existing roof of the main body of the house will not overwhelm the scale of the house. That the proposed addition will be harmonious with the house in terms of materials, details, and finishes. That the hip roof of the hip form of the roof will be consistent with the existing additions hip roof on the opposite side of the house. That the matching eave line of the existing two-story addition corresponding to the size and configuration of the existing second floor windows on the house and centering the second floor window openings over the existing first floor openings will help maintain the formal symmetrical character of the main house and create a balanced appearance with the addition on either side. That the proposed windows of the addition are consistent with the configurations, dimensions, and proportions of the existing windows on the house. That the proposed addition will not detract from the special historic and architectural character of the house and the historic district.
Thank you. And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that motion?
Second,
Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum, can you comment or you want to just? Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Master,
Aye.
9 in favor and none opposed. The motion passes.
All right, that's approved. Thank you. We'll move to the next item.
All right, the next item is public meeting item number 2, LPC 24-05576, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 720, Lot 40, 413 and 415 West 22nd Street in the Chelsea Historic District Extension. This is 2 Anglo-Italianate style row houses built in 1856. The application is to construct rooftop and rear yard additions, install a cornice and balcony, replace entry infill and fencing, and remove portions of floors and the party wall. This was last presented at the public hearing of June 18th, 2024. No action is taken at that time. The applicant will present revisions to the proposal after we open the proceedings.
All right, we'll do that right now. Commissioner Chu, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Master, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, the applicant may speak.
Hello, my name is Tom Claver. I'm the principal architect at KDA. Thank you to the commission, Bernadette, Torrey, and staff. So we are here to represent 415 West 22nd Street. After our previous hearing, we've made some modifications to address the comments that came through there, both from the community and this commission. Most notably, a lowering of the rooftop addition, significant changes to the configuration of the design of the rear, and the working to preserve the interior party wall. So to reorient everybody, this is on the north side of 22nd Street between 9th and 10th Avenue in the Chelsea Historic District Extension. The notable features surrounding the building and the context are a large bookend building on 9th Avenue. We are 3 lots in. Our neighbor at 411 is a nearly full depth built building. And then 417, 19, 23, 21, 23 are all buildings of similar height with a shared cornice line and 5th story additions existing. So to take a look at that quickly in a height map, you can see all of our neighbors to the west of similar height with similar existing additions, and 411 there built out past us with that bookend building on 9th Avenue. Looking at that in Axon, again, we can see here highlighted in blue the prevalence of these 5th story additions on the block. And we also want to call attention to the buildings directly behind us on the south side of 23rd Street, are buildings that are not in the district and play a outsized part of the character of our donut. So in the 1940s, we can see some of the historic detailing that we believe to be original to the building existing, including a protruding cornice and this planting balcony on the above the 2nd floor, and indications of the original brownstone rustication on the parlor floor. By the 1980s, all of that historic detail had been lost. There has been some restoration work already done on the building that we are looking to continue. Most notably, the brownstone on the parlor floor, the lintels and sills on the west side, the 415 side of the property. And we will be looking to continue that work. The rear has undergone significant changes and modifications, most notably the garden level extension, and then the 2-story glass block extension on top of that, as well as the chimney and various other window enlargements, shrinkings, and AC penetrations. This is just a quick site plan to show that we are not proposing to enlarge the footprint of the building. We are simply, it's not really a rear extension. We are just building on top of the existing extension. And again, we will the 411 extends out past us, as well as the porches and balconies of our neighbors at 417, 19, and 21, all extending out past our proposal. Quickly in hardline, our takeaway from the original discussion was that the work proposed on the front was mostly appreciated, and so we are not proposing many changes here. The only change of note is a slight lightening of the ironwork on the 2nd floor planting balcony. The rest of the proposal remains as previously presented, save for the lowering, which is the major change of the rooftop addition by 18 inches. And that was accomplished by both lowering the head height of the addition itself, as well as lowering the 5th floor 7 inches, sort of the existing roof line 7 inches, to shrink that by 18 inches. So we can see in context here, again, the buildings to our west with those existing rooftop additions, and to zoom in and compare the previously proposed to the revised proposal. While we were previously mostly in line with those neighbors to the west, we are now, after that 18-inch shift, sitting below most of our neighbors to the west, more in line with our direct neighbor at 417. The materiality proposed on the front has not changed. Again, mostly restoration work consisting of brownstone stucco for the lintels and sills, some very light restoration work on the front facade, and the top floor addition being proposed in a gray stucco. Sectionally, we are not proposing any excavation or extension or changes to the cellar or subcellar. The major sectional shift here is the current garden level has under 8 feet of head height. So we are shifting some of the head height from the 2nd floor down to that garden level, but the 3rd and 4th floors are being preserved in place, and then a new roof being put on. The other change that is a little bit easier to see in elevation is we have removed the third floor extension out. Previously, there was a portion of the third floor that extended out. We have now removed that, so the only bulk being added really is the parlor floor extension. And then we have a open balcony off the second floor and an open balcony off the fourth floor. There's no enclosed space beyond that, but there is a screening element that ties them together. So comparing the existing proposed and previously proposed, we can see that 18-inch drop in the overall height, accomplished again by lowering the addition itself as well as the roof level. No change to plan or the setbacks, so we remain 15'7" setback from the front brick facade and 19'1" on the western side and 62 inches on the rear. The mock-up was adjusted, lowering that mock-up by 18 inches. So we had worked hard to be invisible to begin with, and we remain invisible from 22nd Street, both across the street, down the blocks, and even across 9th Avenue. There is some visibilities once we start to step down, both on the north and south of 9th Avenue. This is the current visibility. This is not our mock-up. Again, this is the visibility where we are seeing the buildings on 23rd Street that currently visually occupy the place that our addition will occupy. And then if you step to the side, you can clearly see our neighbors' additions. They're visible above the cornice line down 22nd Street. So here is the revised mock-up as we've stepped sort of south of the corner, looking back. That top of the mock-up there represents the top of the FDNY required railing. So that green represents the top main bulk. And then the rendering on the far right there showing an approximation of what the final product will look like. To compare the previous to the currently proposed, we can see a substantial reduction in the visibility there by pushing that down that 18 inches. The other visibility is to the north of 9th Avenue between the two bookend buildings. There's a gap between those two buildings. Our neighbors' additions are currently visible through there. We will now be sitting in front of them. Their flues will still be visible above our addition. And comparing the previous to proposed, again, an 18-inch difference. This view corridor does extend out and pass through the park on the north side of 23rd Street. It's, in my opinion, indiscernible, but the view corridor does exist. So turning our attention to the rear and understanding the context immediately around our building, again, the building to our east 411 extends out over 20 feet past our building. Our 417 to our west also currently extends out past our building. And we can see 419 and 421 extend out, excuse me, past that. So one of the major changes we were looking to make was to change the materiality that we're proposing for the rear rather than proposing a new brick. We are proposing here to harvest the best of this brick on the rear to rebuild the top 2 stories of this with the reuse of this existing fabric. This was a deep analysis. We went to look to see if there's any obviously historic notable features on the rear, which we didn't believe there were, understanding the context and the lack of continuity between us and our neighbors. And then also the opportunity costs of what we were looking to do here as far as a sustainable envelope we were trying to build with the connection to the roof led us to want to rebuild the top 2 stories and then harvest this brick as the material there. This here, again, most of just looking at the mock-up. We'll talk about the design of the rear in a second. But again, we're mostly in line now with our neighbors. So as we looked at the design, again, this balcony condition, which is prevalent in the neighborhood and specifically in the donut, including several top floor balconies, was an aspect of the design that we wanted to incorporate into our building. And then we also looked at precedents of both combinations that have come through this commission, as well as the neighbors, a full height -1 approach to preserve the historic fabric at the top, as well as some other contemporary approaches to these non-visible secondary facades. And the last piece that was important to our client was this proliferation of arches in the neighborhood. He really fell in love with this arch that he feels that he sees all over the neighborhood, and asked if we can incorporate that arch and reflect that someplace on the rear of the building. So the main design here again is to, and it's a little bit easier to see in cutaway, is to have a parlor floor extension and then two open balconies, one on the second floor and one on the fourth floor, that is connected by this screening element with these arch brick and arch metal inserts. So looking at the cutaway compared to the previously proposed and the revised proposal, you can see here we are looking to reinstate the size of the widths of the windows and the sill heights of the existing windows, and rebuild that rear facade with the harvested existing material. And we have most notably removed that extension on the third floor and maintain the building line now from the second floor all the way up to the fourth floor. So here we can see that screening element on the front. We've maintained the red brick to differentiate the new material from the old building line. But now you can see we've also removed some of the metal screening from that top bay, since we are no longer extending out, and we can now see the existing building line through this screening element. The materiality hasn't fundamentally changed, obviously, except for the inclusion of this reclaimed brick. So the new materials remain the same, this new red brick and this bronzed stainless steel for the railings, painted windows, and then the stucco for the rooftop addition. Rendering existing and proposed, you can see how we are nestled between our friends at 411 and 417, and how the balcony conditions at 417 have influenced our balcony on our top floor as well. So here's the previously proposed and currently proposed. We are now working to make this differentiation between the original line of brick and the original line of building and our new addition. Now, the biggest change and the hardest one to accomplish, we worked with the structural engineers and the shoring engineers to preserve the first 15 feet of that internal party wall between the two buildings on the garden, first, second, and third floors. This was not easy, but engineers are saying it is doable. So as we knew this was important to the commission, and so we have worked to make that happen here. Plan-wise, the building has not programmatically changed, obviously, except for the inclusion of that brick. And then here on the third floor, sorry, the removal of that extension on the what is labeled as mom's room, it has been removed. The rest of the program remains as previously presented. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions, commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg.
I have two questions. First of all, the Brick Institute does not recommend reuse of brick. So I'm concerned, I understand why you're doing it. It simplifies matching it, but I'm concerned about that for the longevity of what you're building.
So the assembly, the brick would be used as a face brick rain screen, so it wouldn't be primarily used to keep water out. So it is more of an aesthetic concern and how crisp the brick can be harvested. We have accomplished this on the last project we did on 13th Street, harvesting the brick and reusing it. So we do understand the concern that there are sometimes soft edges around that brick that's reharvested.
Well, the real reason is that when the brick first bonds with the mortar goes into the capillaries of the brick and creates a bond. When you reuse a brick, you don't have those capillaries because they're already filled, so you never get as good a bond. But anyway, I know it's done. I just am flagging that as an issue. The other question I have is, there are limited view, well, here you have it, of the other rear yards. Are there any arches on any of the rear yard elevations in this block?
Not that I know of. We don't have, we weren't able to survey the entire interior here, so no. The arch element is, as far as I know, would be singular to our proposal here.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? Okay, let me just check here. All right, so I don't see any other questions, so I think we can move to our discussion. And as the applicant presented the last time we saw that, I think every commissioner present appreciated the work that was happening on the front. A couple of commissioners asked that the balcony be a little less dense, and they have lightened up the density of that ironwork. With respect to the rooftop addition, I think everybody felt that it was a little bit high or too big or too high. And they have lowered it 1.5 feet so that it now aligns with the other rooftop additions, and from most, the two sort of long distant views where you see it, you already see something in those spaces. Either the neighbors' additions or the buildings behind. And so it's going to be seen in that context of the neighboring additions and other buildings behind. With respect to the party wall, we did ask them to keep more of the building. This was really related to both the rear facade and the party wall. They have kept 15 feet of the party wall, which is consistent with and even greater than other party walls we have required people to maintain, or walls within the location of the party wall, where we have asked people to consider keeping some. And then finally, at the rear facade, I think there was a lot of discussion about keeping the top floor and maybe even the floor below it. So so what they've done is they've lowered the arcade. They are now keeping the top 2 floors in their existing plane. And I think previously at the 3rd floor, it was pulling out. But they are proposing to rebuild it using salvaged brick, as we've just heard. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Goldblum, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I think that the rooftop visibility has improved and seems to be more or less in sync with other rooftop additions on the block. I'm a little troubled with the height of that kind of skylight bulkhead thingy, but it does appear to be more or less in line with other ones on the block. I would suggest that if others are troubled by it, that they bring it down to the height of adjacent bulkheads. Even though it isn't a bulkhead, it's just a skylight. I didn't see any visibility of it from the different views, so I don't think it's a visibility issue. It just seems gratuitous, but that's really not a good basis for things. I think the rear facade still troubles me personally. I'd be interested to hear what others think, but I think that they've made teeny weeny gestures to the fact that it was a double building and remains, from our perspective, 2 buildings historically. The break in the cornice is nice, but it's not really, even if you look at the precedents that they showed of other much more modern, or certainly on page whatever it is, LPC 31 of 69. They all keep, those that are two building wide, keep the vestige, the suggestion of 2 buildings. The rhythm of the block is maintained from within the donut. This arcade, even though it has these tiny little fig leaves of separation, doesn't in its essence do that. And so for that reason, I'm troubled by it. The arches I find to be out of left field. I understand, owners like arches. That's okay. But and I think Mark's right that one rarely sees arches on rear facades, but we do grant applicants a lot of leeway on rear facades to do what they want, as page 30 shows. So I don't think that the arches per se are inappropriate. I just think that the unification of the 2 facades is inappropriate. And whether they modify that by altering the rhythm, changing the degree of the screening, or however they wish to do it, that's their prerogative. But I think that this, to me, looks very much like a unifier and not a separator. And looking at the scale of it in the block, it strikes me that it would appear to break the rhythm of the donut. I'm also troubled by the wholesale skinning of the rear facade. I don't remember hearing that there was a structural analysis. Did I miss that? That said that the whole thing had to come off?
I didn't hear that either. I think there was something about sustainability and
Right. Well, we've had plenty of applicants to do net zero houses and they didn't strip the building off. So I think that there are ways to skin this cat, so to speak, without skinning the cat. I think that, the photos indicate that there's some damage under the windows. Repair, don't replace. And I think that goes for both the two floors that they're maintaining. I think it's lovely that they are preserving the top two floors in their entirety. I think that the matter of the party wall is one where I probably fall out of the norm. I think it's one of those things like top two floors of the building that we should, as a commission, think about creating a standard for to the extent that we can. And we do have exceptions to the keep the top floor rule. But it's the kind of thing that I think is kind of core to the notion of a building, that it has four walls, a roof, and a basement. And to the extent that we allow for it to be perforated when connecting buildings, I think that developing a standard and thinking about that in some way would be a useful
so I
thing for
think,
us to do.
yeah, we have looked at, row houses that have been combined a number of times over the last many years. And actually, I think the first one where we really discussed the party wall was the combination of the row houses adjacent to the Whitney Museum. And at that, in that proposal, we sort of set a standard of 7 feet. And in the years since, we have either asked people to keep 7 feet, or in some cases, we've actually approved the entire removal of it in its entirety. So we haven't been consistent, but I think to the extent that there has been a standard set, 7 feet is about where we had
Got it.
landed at that time. So
Yeah.
that's where we were.
I remember that one, but I also, I personally think that that's not enough. I think personally, I'd put it more at 50%. I think the integrity of the building as a building is an important consideration, apart from visibility and other matters that we consider as criteria for appropriateness.
All right, thank you.
I wouldn't oppose this project, because I think they've done a fairly okay job. I think they could have done more, but I think it's not the worst. But I think it's something that we should think about.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, Commissioner Ginsburg.
So first, I want to note that I think the reduction in the bulkhead is good. The front facade is good. I appreciate the retaining of some of the party wall. I do agree with Commissioner Goldblum's comments on both why not repair instead of reuse the brick for that rear facade. And also trying to differentiate a bit the two buildings that have now been combined, but keep a remnant of that. And I have to say, and I'll defer the other commissioners, I think there are too many arches. Maybe the arches in the top with brick are all right. But you look at the rear facades of the other buildings, and they're the punched windows, and it just seems to me to be a bit much. And since I don't know, I think we may be sending you back to work on the rear facade. I would look at trying, I'd prefer no arches, but at least not, the arches at the top make some sense, but then the other arches in there seem very glued on, and I think it could just be made simpler.
All right, Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Michael and Commissioner Ginsburg. I think that I'm glad that they lower the height. I think that's helpful, and I think the front is fine. I think the rear needs tweaking, is quite clear. The question is how, and I'm not gonna play designer here. One of the gut instinct for me was that you have, starting on the back, a base potentially of a 3-floor base, and then a setback of 2 floors, and then an addition of 1. So it's a 3-2-1. But currently, obviously, it's not. Currently, you have a, you know, and maybe that's why it's giving some of the commissioners the, you know, especially the comment about too many arches. And so it is something that would leave it to the rest of it.
Okay, Commissioner Lutfi.
So I'm in agreement with a lot of what we've heard. The front, the work on the front is good, and the visibility, the reduction in the visibility, I think works so that what we see blends in with the rooftops around it. I also agree that even though we tend to be somewhat liberal in terms of the rear facade, that this particular facade is overwhelming relative to the rear yards around it. And I would recommend taking another floor off of it, and also to keep the scale a little more in keeping, and in some way regularizing that rear facade so that it also works with what's around it. I'm on board with the arches issue. And I do agree that there's no reason to reskin the facade if we can retain it.
Okay, before I move across the table, let me go to the remote commissioners. Vice Chair Bland.
Thank you. Yes, the front of the building, I think, retains the notion that of 2 separate buildings, and I think that's the most important aspect of the retention of 2 individual houses. My point being that the front, the street is where we really need to show that. The rooftop additions, I think, are in line with its neighbors, therefore it's fine. I take a slightly different approach in the back. I think these are 2 very narrow houses that are being combined. So their combination, to me, doesn't overwhelm the idea that this house is one gigantic, 50-foot wide house, for instance. I don't recall the width of each of the individual houses, but their combination doesn't seem to be outlandishly different than others on the block, although it is a bit wider. So therefore, I can accept the idea that they're not differentiated more than they are. Regarding the arches, I find it refreshing and a change, and nobody can see it except the neighbors who live in the donut. This is not a publicly accessible view at all. So I'm not opposed to the rear at this point. I am opposed to the idea of reskinning when we don't need to. So I think that should be worked out with staff, where we keep those 2 floors repairing rather than harvesting and relaying brick.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Chapin.
Well, I find myself very much in agreement with Commissioner Bland. In part because this building is at the end of a row. And most of the other buildings are not combined, so it is combined. And it's really surrounded pretty much on 3 sides by very large buildings. So to me, it's in a somewhat unique situation. It's not in the middle of a row or something where doing something a little different might stand out much more. I think that this using the arches kind of recalls the palazzo architecture and is a bit unusual, but it's not like we haven't seen arches used before in rears. And I don't really find that objectionable in the context. I think it's, it's different, but I think it's okay. Regarding the separation of the buildings, I think just a vertical line down the middle between the two buildings, extending the, sort of push out that's at the top would maybe accomplish that as much as is really needed. I don't think it's, there's I think a minor kind of thing working with the staff could achieve some best further a sense of just a historical recollection. I think that, part of the reason we're seeing the reaction a bit is that it is two buildings combined. So it makes a stronger statement, and, in the rendering, it's dark, it, stands out a bit. But, I think in context that, I would be okay with it, with just looking at the brick issue and making sure that the brick is, it's appropriate to reuse it instead of just reskin it. So that's where I'm at, but it doesn't sound like I'm in the majority.
All right, thank you very much, Commissioner Master.
Yeah, I think the rooftop addition is fine. The front facade is fine. The party wall, as they've proposed, is fine. And in terms of the rear facade, I'm okay with the arches. I think we give people a lot of leeway in the rear facade to do as they wish. I think that the top floor, if we can keep it as is, I think it would be fine. The bricks, instead of recreating it. I agree with Commissioner Bland. I think that other than that, I think that the rear facade is fine if they can keep the top floor.
Okay, Commissioner Chu.
I'm in agreement with my fellow commissioners on most of these issues. I'm okay with the reduction of the height of the rooftop addition. The front facade, I have no issues. On the rear, apart from aesthetics, which I do find the addition a bit awkward, but again, that's we've allowed different styles on additions and rears. I think overall, my opinion is that, and I appreciate that the rear facade is I assume it's being restored on the top two floors. If not, they should be restored. It's easily achievable. There's something a bit odd about restoring the I guess at the third floor and covering it with this new element. I think it's the balance of the whole that my issue is. It's not a major addition in terms of planned depth. It's very minimal, but it's like putting a wall up in front of the existing facade. And I think that retaining that third floor is a good thing. I would just move the addition piece, brick screen, if you will, down the floor. Because I feel like on the rear, the existing building is being lost between this minor addition that's not so deep, but in terms of elevation covers. And that in combination with a rather large rooftop addition. And I feel like the existing facade of that single floor is not enough to retain its presence.
Okay. All right, so I think we won't take an action today. Thank you for presenting the revisions. And I think we're all fine with the front and the rooftop addition. And I think at the back, I think we've heard a consensus of opinion about the keeping of the top two floors rather than rebuilding. Try to come back to us with something that keeps those in place. And that combined with the 15-foot party wall should be able to keep enough integrity of the existing building. And then when it comes to the additional addition, I think we've heard some comments about introducing some elements to differentiate the two buildings, and some comments about arches, and I sort of will leave it up to you to figure out how you want to address those. We've also had some comments that are fine with it as is. So I think it's a matter of tweaking it, but just figuring out the right tweak, whether it's lowering it one floor, whether it's lightening up the top and introducing some element that breaks up the rhythm of the arches. But I think we've kind of had a bit of a variety of opinion. And so I'll leave it to you to figure out the response and come back to us. And when you come back, we'll just focus on the rear facade. Right. Thank you very much. We'll move to the next item.
All right, the next item is public meeting item number 3, LPC 24-10084, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 847, lot 62. 115 Fifth Avenue, aka 881 to 887 Broadway in the Ladies Mile Historic District. This is a second Empire-style department store building designed by Griffith Thomas and built in 1868 to 76. The application is to install signage and a flagpole and install interior partitions and digital screens. This was last presented at the public hearing of July 16th, 2024, and no action was taken at that time. The applicants are here to present revisions to the proposal after we open the proceedings.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Lutfi. Would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Chen. Would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I,
Opposed? All right. The applicants may speak when they're ready.
Good morning, Commissioners. We were here about 2 weeks ago for Aritzia on 115 Fifth Avenue. I think we've been familiar with this site. I'll go reasonably quickly through what we're doing. You gave us a lot of great input at the end of the last meeting, which was late in the afternoon. Thank you for the early morning meeting. And we worked with Leanne, as you directed, we worked with Leanne and Caroline to work on the 3 outstanding issues, which I think I can respond to pretty cleanly. Just to refresh, we know the site. It's the original Abercrombie and Fitch building. And a lot of interventions have happened since it was part of the district. It's been in a very good state of restoration. Aritzia committed to all the non-hearing issues of restorative nature on the building. That was all basically approved at the staff level. These are, again, to the photos. These are important corners, the going down the 19th Street and the Fifth Avenue photo. So the big issues that we were here for were the Fifth Avenue signage, the flag, and the LED screens. Why don't we take them and I'll the signage issue. I think we proposed to reduce the size of get the right. That was the previously proposed. A few of the commissioners had some good insights into it. I hope Aritzia is watching. They agreed with us, and they I think it's a good solution and very appropriate in the context of a lot of the other historic district signage. And if there's any questions about that, we can go into it in a minute. It's the new signage, just to get the dimensions, are 6'3" wide and 1 foot 3 inches high, which is a significant reduction, but it's also within the framework of the architecture unit. And it's mounted to the metal storefront, not to the cast iron, and which is not there. And the reasoning for the signage not to be over the front store entrance is the design of the 2 open bays broken up by 1 bay with signage. And that's, these were surrounding signage, which, I would argue that our signage proposal is absolutely in that kind of context. Now, the flags, since Liam Houlihan from my office did a lot of the walking up and down the avenue, getting the rest of the flag shots, I've asked him to respond to that portion.
So we're keeping in here from the previously proposed design. We decided to keep the design and push forward with doing a better site analysis of what was the surrounding site. So the main reasoning for keeping it was if you see the building that is next to it, which is 111 Fifth Ave, they have two primary flags on that main facade with actually a third one on the secondary facade. And if you can see when you are standing back looking down the street, that having the American flag and the sign and the flag that is above the storefront is a very prominent feature to see on that Fifth Ave Ladies Mile. So we are proposing to add an additional flag to keep the American flag while having the Aritzia flag over the entrance of the new proposed Fifth Ave design, as well as with having the American flag over the corner for future designs, if they are to add back a storefront, which is originally there now, they have two storefront entrances.
So that we're asking for relief on that one. Now, the last issue was the proposed LED screens. And Aritzia asked me to they have in our last hearing, we were, as in our last hearing, we'd like to integrate the screens on the corner of 5th and 19th Street. And we heard your concerns about and worked with Aritzia to try to address these issues. They asked me to restate their reasoning, which is the full height display screen is essential for creating a cohesive visual experience that aligns with the window heights, making their brand creative content feel like an integrated part of the building rather than displayed as a standalone technology. They felt a shorter, and we feel a shorter screen would disrupt the illusion, reducing the potential impact to an audience. And then the full height is more keeping with the existing fenestration and just how the building is shaped. You can see that it's essentially a freestanding element, and if it is on the corner, you very much, as you're coming down the block, because it's a long facade on both facades, you see right behind it, it's way into the store. It's not blocking, and it in fact stays with the guidelines about setback height. The big issue is how tall they are. And again, we're trying to make that argument that the nature of the windows on that corner are the double height, and we'd like to not reduce them. I know we've gone back and forth with the different commissioners, and if there's any questions, we can try to respond.
So last time it was behind 3 windows, right?
Yeah.
So you've reduced it down to the corner. Okay, which is what actually some commissioners specifically asked for.
Which increases that viewpoint into the store.
Okay.
And just as an aside, knowing this neighborhood from growing up, and I'm from that neighborhood, it was a dismal place. The whole Ladies Mile has definitely reinvigorated it. It got really scary during COVID because I thought it was going down again. Aritzia has 3 landmark properties that they've invested an enormous amount in the restorative nature of the mall, but they are a retailer and they are trying to stay on top of the retail movement, and they're making a case for this.
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, I don't see any questions, so I think we can move to our discussion. So the last time that we saw this, I think that there's the clear curtain wall behind the other bays, and everybody was okay with those. And everyone was okay with the signage on 19th Street, but on Fifth Avenue, where there was the one large sign spanning the two bays, most commissioners recommended that they reduce that to two smaller signs that fit within the bays and not spanning any columns. I think most commissioners were also comfortable with the two flagpoles, which is the one additional flagpole. Although two commissioners did ask that they look at putting one on each side. But most were fine with it on Fifth Avenue, given the precedent. And then with respect to the digital signs in the windows, commissioners' comments sort of varied, but generally recommended the applicant reduce the number and or size. So some commissioners felt that just two would work at the size they were proposing. Others felt that they could have three if they reduce them in size. And then others felt that they needed to look at reducing two. I think two other commissioners thought that they should look at reducing size and number. But they have come back to us today, reducing the number of windows that those digital screens would be behind and just limiting it to the corner. So we'll begin our discussion, Commissioner Master.
Yeah, I think that I'll start with the flags. I think the flags are fine. I think that you've shown that it's very typical on Fifth Avenue and we're not doing anything out of the ordinary. I was okay with the signage before, but I think that the two smaller signs on the bays, it also works. And then I understand your argument regarding the digital screen taking up the full window space, about how you need that as a brand, and that if we reduced it, the size of it, that you wouldn't have the brand impact that you wanted. Therefore, you're just putting it on the corner and reducing the number of windows that you're using that for. I'm okay with that. So I can find this appropriate.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I did want to just also note that we did receive a letter from the Victorian Society of New York, which was shared with everyone in advance. Commissioner Chu?
Sorry, I didn't hear what you just said about.
Oh, I just was noting that we did receive a letter on the revised proposal, which was shared with everyone in advance today.
Okay. So I think that the revision to the main sign in terms of scale and breaking it into two is much better. I think that is approvable and appropriate. I don't have an issue with the banners, the flags. I think they're okay. In terms of the digital signage, I definitely appreciate the removal of one of the bay windows on 19th Street. I feel like this is something that we are going to continue to see.
Yeah.
And we don't have a specific way to, in terms of percentages, we've talked about it. I think this proposes something to me that I makes me want to look at the whole picture in terms of the proposal, not just this one, but any other application. It's really about how it's being deployed in the overall storefront design and how well it respects the historic building. In this case, and I want to hear what my fellow commissioners say, I'm okay with this only because it does celebrate the full height of the expression of the storefront across the facade. And it really is just the corner and it's set back. It's not pushed up against the glass. So that my sense of the whole store is that it is a transparent store and there happens to be a corner that has some advertising in it. I would prefer this, for example, to a smaller size sign in every window bay, for example. So
Right.
I continue to feel that we cannot set standards. We have to look at the whole picture because every case is going to be different.
Yeah.
This one feels appropriate to me.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum.
I agree that the flags and sign are appropriate. And I agree with Stephen in that I think it's not going to be something that's going to lend itself to a formula. But I think that the principles that we've talked about in the past regarding these is a good principle. And that principle, as I recall it, is that we want to encourage visibility into the space while also not cutting the knees off of retailers. I think in this case, given the configuration of the windows, my view is that what's important in this storefront is that transom line. I think that the transom is a consistent element in this storefront that wraps around the corner, and I think that the LED being focused in this corner is a good thing. But I would suggest they bring it down to the height of the transom line, which looks like it's only around 12 feet off the ground. So my guess is that that would handle most. That would be a pretty good impact for most folks. And I think by bringing it down, it would allow for visibility into the space, which is rather uniquely tall. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg.
So I think the signage is an improvement. I think the flags are fine. And I tend to agree with Commissioner Chu that given that it's at the LED signs are at the corner, and adjacent to that are full display windows opening up into the store, that I can accept this as is. I think Commissioner Goldblum's suggestion of lowering it to the transom might be a solution, but I think this is appropriate as is, as long as they keep the other windows open to the store.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen.
Very interesting discussion. I'm in agreement. I think the two signs are an improvement relative to what I see on the other streets. This is a better sign than the others. I have no problem with the flag and the banner. I'm in agreement with Commissioner Mastro and Commissioner Chu, in that if you read the base is a massive monumental scale. So therefore, I think it is an improvement over the previous horizontal going across and blocking the visual. And I think because the proportion here in this instance, talk about principle, is that it is set back, is translucent in a way. And I think in this case, this is appropriate. I really think it is appropriate because the base reads at simply on the corner. The rest of it is, and to me is, I don't feel like cutting it in half. I don't think that, I think the transom is there for necessity because the glass simply cannot be that big. But I think it is an integral part of the corner.
Okay, and I think because it is set back so much from this particular view, you can see kind of past it, sort of then in connection with the other transparent display windows, so that even if it's vertical, I think that helps. Commissioner Lutfi?
So, I do think it's great that Aritzia has made a statement about wanting to be in New York and has established a footprint here that demonstrates that. Of course, they do have a market, so it would make sense. And I appreciate aesthetically what the store is trying to do. And overall, I think their efforts are very handsome. I don't have a problem with the two flagpoles. I can see that that is something that's going on Fifth Avenue as you look south and possibly north, I don't know. And I think the new proposal about the signage is actually stronger. And if you look at it from a visual standpoint, around the building, it ties in quite nicely with how the storefront display works, you know, at the transom. So I actually have a different opinion. I think it's a little more consistent with what Michael Goldblum said, which is that I still am having a problem with what's happening at the corner. I do think that this is a very important visual access point for people as they are looking at this important visual entryway into the store. I don't think it's consistent with the rest of the display, both from a signage standpoint and how the windows have been done, which are quite attractive. And I do hope that we move to have some standardized approach to how we deal with these things if possible.
So what we've talked about before is that there is a standard for a staff level approval, which is that 50% of the window be obscured. So, but we're going to see more requests that seek to go outside of the 50%. And so that's what we talk about here. And I think we heard from Commissioner Chu and Commissioner Goldblum that one formula may not work for every building type and location, and sort of that you may need to consider it in the context of the specific building and the rest of the application. What, you know, the rest of the cumulative amount.
Right.
Okay. All right, Vice Chair Bland.
I think this has emerged now as a very elegant solution that takes the needs of the retailer and puts that, you know, advocates for their needs. The flags mimic what's right down the block and you know, right adjacent. We see it right there in this rendering. The signs are beautiful, as Commissioner Chin noted, more beautiful than other signs in the immediate area. And I think the way the digital sign has been organized now around the corner, only around the corner, is quite elegant. Because it's set back, you are able to get little glimpses of the rest of the store behind it. It's clearly an element within the space as opposed to a scrim that's blocking the space. Could it be lower? I suppose, but do we really need to see just more ceiling? What's the matter with seeing a big sign like this? I think it's quite all right. I'm quite an advocate for not trying to establish guidelines that work for every single application that we might have. The size and massiveness of this corner is unusual, terrific, and I think because of it, it can withstand the signage behind it. So, all in all, I think this is a very appropriate now a scheme.
Thank you, Commissioner Chapin. Commissioner Chapin? Is she there?
She's muted. I'm asking to unmute.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I'm sorry. I do think we're looking at this because there is a guideline for the staff. And therefore we can make another decision, obviously. I do think there's a good reason for the original guideline, which is to preserve transparency into the storefront, which should be done. I think that in this case, that the setback is the thing that's giving me the ability to say that this could be okay. Because I don't think I would not want to approve windows that are really look like they are totally blocked and don't have any sense of the transparency that we like to see to give the sense of the interior of the space to the pedestrian. So the fact that, as Commissioner Bland was saying, and you said, Chair Carroll, you know, you're able to see on either side into the store somewhat and realize that this is not a solid window, but something in back of the window gives me the ability to say that I could, in this instance, approve it. But I think that, you know, it's okay to have a 50% guideline and have the staff, you know, just be able to approve those, and we will be looking at others and see the individual context. But for me, the ultimate issue is whether transparency really exists in the ability to see into the store. And I'm persuaded from what I've heard that this one does achieve that. I think all of the other issues about the changes that they have made are appropriate.
Thank you very much. I think we have enough commissioners to support the proposal as is. So Commissioner Master, would you make the motion? Yeah, that's just page 2.
In the matter of LPC 24-10084, 115 Fifth Avenue, AKA 881-887 Broadway, Ladies Mile Historic District. A second Empire-style department store building designed by Griffith Thomas and built in 1868, 1876. Application is to install signage and a flagpole and install interior partitions and digital screens. I note that the ground floor of the building was heavily modified prior to designation and restored in the 1990s pursuant to LPC permits. I also note that the existing flagpole at the Fifth Avenue facade was present at the time of designation. I recommend approval, finding that there is precedent for internally illuminated dimensional letters at other nearby storefronts along Fifth Avenue, and given the length of retail streets frontage at this building, the installation of 2 internally illuminated signs at Fifth Avenue and 1 at East 19th Street will not overwhelm or detract from the significant architectural features of the building or the historic district. That the internally illuminated signage will be well scaled to the proportions of the storefront bays, and the installations will not result in damage to historic fabric. That the dimensional letters proposed at the storefront glazing are modest in scale and will not substantially reduce the transparency of the display windows. That the installation of an additional flagpole at the Fifth Avenue facade is consistent with the presence of flagpoles both at this building and within the historic district, and the size of the flagpole will be well scaled to the building, and the presence of 2 flagpoles will not overwhelm this facade. That the digital screens are limited to two bays at the corner and set back from the display windows and will allow for visual access to the store. And I think that the interior curtain wall at the southern storefront bays on Fifth Avenue will be deeply set back from the display window and will feature minimal framing and semi-translucent tinted glass. Therefore, it will allow for the depth of the space behind the glass to be perceived and will maintain a level of visibility to the interior. And that certain aspects of the proposed work will not detract from the special architectural or historic character of the building.
And Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion? Commissioner Chapin?
Second.
All right, Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Chu.
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Nope.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Nay.
Commissioner Master.
Aye.
7 in favor and 2 opposed. The motion passes.
Okay, that's approved. Thank you. We'll move to the next item.
Next item is public meeting item number 4, LPC 24-10008. An application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1931, lot 10. 253 West 125th Street, the Apollo Theater, originally Hertig and Siemens' new burlesque theater, an individual and interior landmark. It's a neoclassical style theater building with a classically inspired interior designed by George Keister and built in 1913 to 14. The application is to use substitute materials and historic signage and alter portions of the designated interior. This was last presented at the public hearing of June 18th, 2024, and no action was taken at that time. The applicants will present the revisions to the proposal after we open the proceedings.
All right, so let's do that. Commissioner Chu, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldblum, would you second that?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. You may begin.
Terrific. Good morning, Commissioners. Cass Stackelberg, Higgins, Quays, Barth and Partners, INS. Let me just introduce our team. We're excited to be back to share design revisions with you for this important project for the Apollo. We're joined today by Michelle Ebanks, President and CEO of the Apollo, Aldo Scrofani, COO of the Apollo, Jared Schomer of Charcoal Blue, my colleague Sarah Schur, and Chris Cowan, Meyer Blinder Bell. I'm going to go through the design revisions, but before I do, Michelle would like to say a few words to everybody. She wasn't able to be here back in June.
All right. And I'll just note for the record that Vice Chair Bland is recused on this item.
Thank you, Cass. Yes, Michelle Ebanks, President and CEO of the Apollo. We appreciate the attention that the staff and the commissioners have given to this important project. Our team has worked together since the public hearing in June, and we're excited to share the updates today. This project is a major milestone for the Apollo Theater in our 90th anniversary year. And this project will ensure that we are well positioned for the next chapter so that we can continue to serve artists and audiences. The enhancements are significant for this next chapter. The lobby improvements allow for a contemporary space that will increase our ability to gather visitors and welcome those not only from the local Harlem area and broader New York, but from around the world. The auditorium improvements are basic, but they are essential, from acoustics, air conditioning, and seating. Together, these improvements will ensure that the Apollo continued to carry out its mission for years to come. We're very grateful for your time today.
Terrific. So let's get right into it. This is a new rendering. One of the comments that came out of the discussion back in June was not only to see a more sort of direct view as you come from the vestibule, looking north to the end of the hall, to the end of the lobby, to the orchestra, but to also animate these with people in the renderings. And I think capturing the energy of this space is very important. So what I wanted to do is sort of just talk about the highlights of the revisions. Thank you, Commissioner. But also just to note sort of at the outset, your comments back in June, they were about sort of the experience of being in this lobby space, but they were also sort of more fine-grained comments about some of the design elements. And so we've tried to sort of address obviously both of these so that one feels the sort of spirit and energy of the lobby, but also to improve some of the detailing as per your comments. So excuse me, looking sort of across the space, there were comments about the floor previously, about it being sort of too dramatic and overscaled, and the terrazzo, the being too dark. We've lightened it. We've also taken a much lighter touch to the way that the graphics are represented in the flooring, and we'll talk specifically about dimensional changes, material changes. Across the walls, on the left margin of the rendering, you can see that there is this interactive display. That display was further down the wall, down the hall, down on the west wall of the lobby. That's now been brought up to this sort of main bay, entry bay into the lobby. So as you come in from the vestibule, there's this immediate sort of interactive space where visitors, audience, the public can come and learn more about the theater, about the performers who have been, the artists who've performed in the theater. There was a lot of discussion about the entry to the balcony stair. And what we've done now is we've brought the wall, and there's now a corner pier that marks the end of that wall. It's now sort of more of an enclosed framed opening. There's a soffit and fascia, whereas that was full height up to the ceiling. Now that signage is up against a fascia, so there's sort of more of a portal entry into that balcony stair. There were comments about the lighting. There were feelings that it was sort of too generic and they were set too low in this space. And the team has been working diligently on a new lighting design for the lobby. What we're representing here, this will be a custom fixture. We're working through the detailing, but what we wanted to indicate here is that this is going to be a new fixture. It's sort of derived from the sort of Art Deco fixtures that you saw in the 1930s, 40s photo that we had in the public hearing set. And they're intended to have brass elements, frosted glass, not necessarily part of that sort of neoclassical tradition that was part of the original design of the lobby, but the sort of more Deco-inspired design that is this sort of later period of significance for the Apollo, when the Apollo began in the early 1930s. So those fixtures now are set much higher into the ceiling, and they sort of create this sort of staccato rhythm that I think then leads one down north across the lobby to the orchestra doors. And there was a lot of discussion as well, sort of speaking about sort of the experience of this space, about procession, and about sort of recapturing that sense of procession from the vestibule, from the street under the marquee to the vestibule to the lobby, leading to the balcony, mezzanine stairs, and ultimately to the orchestra stairs at the orchestra doors at the end. And so we've been working together to enhance all the different design elements, and obviously the lighting, to create this sort of procession that leads you into this space. And then, of course, the opening on the right side, there's some detailing that's been incorporated into the fascia above the opening to sort of mitigate the scale of that. We're showing what we expect to be donor signage, just 8-inch donor signage on the wall above that. But together, now you have much more sort of an axial procession from the entry down into the orchestra. Reminding you all of what the existing conditions look like today. This is on the left as the lobby appears. No historic finishes remain today. And then that same rendered view on the right, incorporating terrazzo flooring similar to the materiality of what was there historically, and then getting back to that sort of neoclassical framework, the base structure that was there historically, and integrating a sort of up-to-date level of a finish and function for this important entry space. These are the comparative views. So on the top of this slide is the rendering that you saw at the original hearing, and then on the bottom is the same view with the updated materials and detailing. And a few things to point out. There was, as I mentioned, there was a discussion about the flooring. About it having a little bit too much drama and energy to it. And so what we've done is we've taken that down a notch. It's the same concept of sort of an abstraction of the Apollo A from the signage on the outside, but taking what had been detailed at 3 or 4 inch brass divider strips paired in the black terrazzo floor to now a much narrower 3/4 inch divider strip, no longer paired, which now I think further abstracts this and really makes it more of a sort of a background feature as one comes into the theater. We looked at different alignments for the lettering, but it felt like it became a little bit too literal. And so as you come in and you see it at an angle, it really adds a lot of motion and energy, but in a more abstracted way than I think what we had before. I'll also point out that we've changed the materiality of the terrazzo. So instead of having a black matrix and black pigment, it's now a gray aggregate and a much lighter flecked aggregate. And I'll just pass this around. This is the intended finish. We're probably going to have a little bit lighter, but I'll pass this sample around. As you can see that. And we think it'll bring quite a bit more life to the floor, something that was rendered a bit too monochromatic and too dark in that first rendering. Obviously, you can also see the changes at the entry to the balcony stair. So previously, that side wall was held back and the railing came forward and that front step was kind of exposed. And then the signage just was suspended from the beam. And so there's a lot of discussion at the public hearing about making that a little bit more of a sort of a terminus at the end of that wall, making it more of a portal feeling similar to the way it existed historically. So we've introduced a pier. We've pulled that wall south so that it's framed now on either side by these two piers, and then introduced a soffit across the top of the opening that the signage now is affixed to directly. You can also see the change in the lighting from those hoop fixtures that people felt were a little too contemporary and too generic to this more deco-inspired brass and frosted glass fixture. The opening to the adjacent space in the non-designated area remains the same with a little bit more articulation to give it a little more scale and detail. Continuing through, this is now a view south. You can obviously see the significant change to the flooring. It becomes a little bit more of a background feature, but obviously with connections to the iconic signage. There were comments about obviously about the lighting. You can see the change and the significant change in feeling with the lighting. I'll also just point out that the color remains the same. It's meant to be a white that's coming across a little bit as a sort of a creamy color in these renderings, but it's meant to be a white finish across the walls with a marble base. That soffit on the upper left of both of these images, this is basically the stair landing, and there's a large air conditioning duct in there. There's some additional lighting, some additional signage on that. We didn't want to sort of dress that up too much and make it become some architectural feature. So we thought sort of leaving it simple in its detailing was probably the best way to handle that. Flipping around now and looking north back to the orchestra doors. Again, there was a lot of discussion about their scale and the detailing and materiality. So what we've done is we've sort of redesigned that whole opening. So the brass finish for the doors now is shown with a sort of proper luster, and I'll pass these samples around. This lighter finish is really the primary brass finish, which will be the framing of the doors, the framing of the panel above, and then this darker finish is the letters themselves. So I think these doors become much more of a destination at the end of the lobby, and will have a sort of luster to them and luminosity that I think was missing from, at least from the renderings, has always been the same intent. But I think by raising that frame up to the top of the ceiling, it makes this feel much more of a generous entry portal into the auditorium. And then a bit on materiality as you're looking at the samples, the terrazzo across the bottom, the brass for that sort of reflective brass for the primary elements of the doors, marble base, white painted plaster on the walls, and then you can see on the far right the previous ring lights and the inspiration for our new lighting, which as I said earlier, it will be a custom fixture. So we're still working on the detailing, but they're held much higher up into these coffers. So they don't sort of suppress or depress the feeling as one passes down the lobby space. It feels a bit more generous in proportion. Just a few notes on the vestibule. There were a couple comments about the treatment of the vestibule. A few of you felt it was important to carry that experience of the lobby into the vestibule or vice versa. So as you pass from underneath the marquee directly into the vestibule, we've introduced the same wainscoting that will be in the main lobby space. So there's a connection now from the vestibule directly into the lobby. And similarly, we've modified the way the ceiling is treated. So there'll be a coffer similar. We're not able to achieve the same height as in the lobby, but we're able to, or the same detailing, but we're able to introduce a simple coffer into that ceiling, which have been previously shown as a flat ceiling. So there'll be more continuity, design continuity from one space to the other. Finally, a few line drawing elevations. So across the top, this is the east elevation of the lobby from what you saw in June, and directly below what is the design revision here in with these updates, and then the two elevations below, including the June public hearing set, and then the one on the bottom of the elevation, the revision. So I think the key things to point out in this elevation here, which is the updated east elevation, obviously the change in the vestibule with the wainscoting and the coffer ceiling treatment, that treatment at the stair here, where we're able to pull this pier and this wall out to cap the end of the stair and allow for sort of a more proper portal And then you can also see the change in the elevation of the light fixtures. They're a bit faint, but these are the fixtures here, and then you can see the others hanging significantly lower. And then the other elevation, again, the vestibule sort of working left to right, sort of the primary changes of the detailing within the vestibule to bring that design continuity from the lobby into the vestibule. And then that large display, which had previously been deeper into the lobby, now is going to be in that first bay. So right as you come into the vestibule, there'll be this interactive display with information about performances, but also, of course, historical information, access to that digital archive that we talked about last at the hearing. And just a few additional elevations on the top. This is a view looking north. So again, on the left is what you saw in June, and then on the right, it's a little hard to see an elevation that changes, but again, introducing this pier, holding that corner, and making this sort of more of a portal to that balcony stair. And then the elevations below that of the orchestra doors, again, maybe doesn't look as distinct as difference, but I think the renderings sort of speak to the change in the detailing above the doors. These are 8-foot doors. These are quite generous doors with that panel above, and then the signage set off center so that you can see it, because those paired doors you only see when you're at the entry point. You don't see the other doors. So we wanted to have that orchestra signage just shifted sort of flush left, because that makes it much more legible. As you can see, when you come in from the vestibule here, you don't see this pair of doors at all. So it's important to call that out by shifting the signage to the left side in elevation. Turning to the auditorium, there were a few elements in the auditorium that you asked us to take a look at. Those included some of the lighting, but also the acoustical panels. There are a range of upgrades in the auditorium that are proposed as part of the project. There are circulation changes, changes to the sound and light booth. Those were elements that were not of concern, but there are important upgrades that we need to make, particularly for acoustics, lighting, air conditioning, and seating, which will all enhance the experience for both artists and audience alike. You saw this slide previously. These are the chandeliers that we are proposing. The main chandelier in the auditorium here at the medallion here at the main ceiling area, and then below the balcony, or the mezzanine rather, at the back of the orchestra. What we wanted to do is sort of share a bit sort of better graphics, because we think these weren't really clearly illustrated. And what this chandelier will be composed of, again, will be sort of brass rings with these glass orbs, and there'll be a range of colors, but also finishes. So there'll be clear frosted crystal, and I think the image on the right may sort of give a sense of what this would look like. We've also prepared a rendering, which I think is probably the most compelling image here, to really illustrate both in terms of the scale of this fixture, really appropriate now for the grandeur of the auditorium. You can see on the left the existing crystal chandelier, which is obviously not historic, and really undersized for the space. And then the chandelier with these suspended orbs off of these brass rings, which really pick up on the materiality of the room, but we think also brings a lot of energy and excitement with this central fixture. And then the smaller versions will hang directly in the back of the orchestra. So we wanted to share that with you, because we think the graphics sort of illustrate this a bit better. The sconces along the walls will have the same glass orbs on sort of brass frames, and those are represented along the side walls of the auditorium as well for you to see as part of this. And then the last element that there were some comments about had to do with the fabric panels and acoustic panels that line the side walls. And so presently there are fabric panels held in place with these vertical wood battens. Improving the acoustic is a key element of this project. It allows the Apollo to continue its current program, but also will allow it to do different programming that just wasn't possible. So this is a really important element. There were particular comments about the alignments of the paneling, and so it may be hard to see in this slide, but in the previous version on the far left, you can see the side wall. So this is the north elevation of the auditorium. There wasn't an alignment between the fabric panels and the acoustic panels. And so we've adjusted the width, particularly of the fabric panel. So now there's a relationship between the two. So there isn't sort of this disjointed seams between the two. The other thing we've done is we've compressed the fabric panels, sorry, the acoustic panels, so they're closer together. So whereas we had spacing between each piece, they're now tight together. There's a 4-inch gap that's necessary for installation and function, but they read very differently. And I think I'll show you the elevations, but I'll quickly go to the rendering because I think it's the most clear illustration of these. So the fabric panels are going to be on all 3 sides. The acoustic panels will just be on the north and south, and then this back wall at the balcony. A little bit of information, some detailing. The panels will be wrapped in this monochromatic lush red color. We looked at different using different textures and patterns, but what we found was that the seams actually become much more noticeable and draw attention to itself. This photograph on the lower left is similar to how we're installing. This is basically what the fabric panels will look like with this sort of uniform finish. You really don't see the seams between them. So we thought that was actually sort of a more important treatment than trying to introduce some abstracted pattern that we felt would make these much more of a feature. So this is a rendering, an updated rendering where you can see the fabric panels along the walls and then these acoustic panels, which read almost like drapes now, these sort of vertically oriented elements on the upper sections of the north and south walls. And then side by side, so on the left is as an existing photograph, in the middle is what you saw back in June, and on the right is the update. So I'm not sure if you can see in the existing photo, but there's a sort of vertical reading of these battens that exist today. The jointing and spacing in the middle, we agreed sort of drew a little too much attention to these panels, and that they begin to read a bit too prominently. And then by connecting the panels themselves vertically, these become sort of more simple sort of vertical elements. And we think will be actually quite recessive. The sort of vertical reading is not dissimilar to what exists today in these wooden battens that one sees in the auditorium today. So I'll just come back to this central lobby rendering. The goal here has been to sort of capture the spirit of this space, to balance the historic quality of this space, historically this neoclassical detailing, but to introduce these contemporary finishes, reminding you all that there is no historic finish in this lobby space, and coming up with a design that we think really reflects the history of the space, but also sort of brings new energy to it in a way that is both appropriate to satisfy the Landmarks Commission requirements, but also to satisfy the Secretary of the Interior standards, which are a requirement as part of the historic tax credit. This cafe space to the right, you can see on the right of the slide, really an important new addition for the Apollo, for gathering, for the public to come, for the audience to come before and gather after performances. We've talked about the changes in the auditorium, the circulation changes, acoustics, really enhancements for artists and audience alike. And then the changes that we talked about back in June on the exterior, particularly the change from the neon signage to the LED, really critical for upkeep, energy efficiency, and for long-term performance. And so together, we think all these changes really are key to the Apollo as it looks forward to its next chapter.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldblum.
So what is I must have missed it. The vertical lines shown as wainscoting material. What is that? What's it made of?
Materiality?
Yeah.
And so that it's a GFRP. It's a fiber reinforced plaster.
Right.
GFRG. Sorry.
Right.
It's a reinforced. Right. So it's finished. It will look like plaster.
So it's smooth. So it doesn't have lines.
It does have a scowl. Chris. Let me answer the question.
So on the rendering, I don't see lines, but in the elevations, I saw lines. Right. And I was just wondering what it is.
Yeah, Chris now. Yes, there's going to be a subtle scalloping, so you'll get some vertical lines.
Scalloping.
And the light at the chair rail you see will illuminate that very gently, subtly, so you get.
And is there a baseboard as well? And it looked like there was a baseboard on the line.
Yeah, there's a marble base.
Oh, so it's marble base. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Marble base white marble match the GFRG.
Yeah.
It looks monolithic in the rendering.
Yeah, the colors are meant to be very similar to each other. The white marble, the GFRG will be painted, so it has a plaster look finish, and that will match the marble base. Marble base, obviously, for durability and cleaning.
All right, other questions? Yes, Commissioner Chu.
I remember the last presentation, we had one more comment. I remember some of us were to relook at the HVAC big diffusers in the theater ceiling. Was that something you were able to do?
So there was one comment about that. We did look at that. One of the key pieces of sort of the acoustical considerations in the auditorium is about having proper flow. And so, as you all probably know, the smaller the diffusers become, the louder the sort of volume of air passing through them is. So this is something we've certainly studied. We're not able to make them smaller. They need to be sort of the size that they are as proposed. They're going to be painted out white to match the ceiling around it. The others, currently some are painted white, some are painted sort of a bronzy color. They become much more apparent, we think, as they are today. So that's something we did look at. I'm sorry I didn't mention that, but at the moment we're not proposing any changes to that.
Was there the possibility of adding more and reducing their size?
I'm definitely not able to answer that.
I mean, I totally understand the
Yeah.
issue.
Let me, I'll try to answer.
Okay.
I'm not the mechanical engineer or the acoustician, but the idea was to move the air very slowly.
High volume, low velocity.
Exactly.
I get it.
There's going to be different types of
Yep.
shows, whatever. The space above the main ceiling of the auditorium is very limited.
Mhm.
And to try to add more diffusers, we felt would be difficult in terms of layout, but also we just didn't think we wanted to add a lot of round diffusers up there. We felt that might be even more distracting, just enlarging the round diffusers that are there now. That was our thinking behind that.
Okay.
So I can go to the RCP if you want to.
Just so we can see what we're talking about.
There are 6 today, and we're adding one, although we're making them not. Sorry. So you can see there's sort of a combination of sizes. Some of them are actually inserted into the decorative plaster. Obviously, we're taking those out, restoring the plaster. Right, to Chris's point, these are highlighted in this RCP so that you can see them, but we're repositioning them and adding one. They are larger. These are not the only supply areas. Obviously, there are linear diffusers. There's a whole effort here to obviously provide better air conditioning than exists today, but to also do it in a way that taps into the acoustical needs of the house, of the auditorium itself.
Again, I'm sorry if I'm asking a lot of detail, but just if I look at the layout on the right, assuming it would be okay to accept the less number of diffuser option, is there any adjustability on the RCP layout? Is there minor adjustments that I'm just looking at triangles and circles that don't quite center and they're slightly off? That kind of stuff could be refined.
I believe so.
Okay.
Are you speaking about something in
Just
particular there?
well, the 2 triangles on the top, I feel like the diffusers are
I see.
not quite centered. They could be centered.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
They're so
Yeah.
large that they might as well be
Yeah.
centered.
In the sail vault there, yeah.
Right.
I think we can do that.
You could do, and
Yeah.
like where the diffusers touch the trim. I don't think you want to
yeah.
do that. It's just a bad detail.
I
'Cause
agree with you.
they'll have collars and trim bits and it'll conflict.
I agree.
Okay, so that's some
Make
minor.
those
Okay,
adjustments,
thank you.
Okay, other questions? Okay, I think we'll move to our discussion. And again, I'll note that the Victorian Society of New York did submit a letter, and that was shared with commissioners in advance of today. So as we discussed last time, and I want to thank Cass for doing a really clear presentation and covering the issues that were discussed. I think there's the change to the LED on the signage on the outside. Everybody was fine with that last time. And then in the lobby, there was a lot of discussion about enhancing the clarity on the procession and referring to the historic character. And so the ways that we talked about that were toning down the floor by rethinking the hoop fixtures which they've done. So again, they've redesigned the floor to have a subtler gold stripe that is an abstraction of the A in the Apollo sign. They have rethought the light fixtures to help with that procession, including changing the hoop fixtures and doing square fixtures that are raised higher in the location. They've added more detail. And I think I want to just say that I think that we understood last time that there is that you are trying to work both in the language of appropriateness, which is what we need to do, as well as working with the state on the Secretary of Interior standards, which does require that you don't replicate something that doesn't exist. And so what is being installed needs to be legible as new. And so we understood that. And I think the goal here, and I think you expressed it very eloquently, is to really restore the spirit of the space. And that is being done by the rhythm of the pilasters, reestablishing the historic rhythm and a level of articulation that is commensurate with the sort of neoclassical inspired style and original intent. And so, but we did talk about this procession, and we talked about toning down the floor, which you worked on, rethinking the hoop fixtures, which you've done, adding more detail and articulation to enhance the openings and also define the processional space. So particularly at the base of the stair and sort of turning that more into a defined portal. But also at the opening to the space, the bar space, which is outside of the designated area. And also continuing the wainscoting and the coffered ceiling in the vestibule also helps with defining that procession. And we also talked about making the doors fill the whole opening, which you've done as well, to try to bring your eyes down and be more in keeping with the original intent. And so I think every comment that we had, you've addressed here. And in the auditorium, we also did talk about the acoustic panels and looking at the datum and the lines. And I appreciate that you've shifted the proportions so that they align with the panels behind. And I think there were some suggestions about adding texture to the fabric, and you, I think, addressed that today and talked about how with condensing the seams in between, if you added a texture, that actually may make it more noticeable. So I appreciate that response. And then finally, we had some questions about the sconces and the chandelier in the auditorium. And I think given more information today to talk about how the sort of glass orbs relate to the historic features in the auditorium. So again, I appreciate the really thoughtful presentation, the changes that you've made, and also where you haven't, the explanations for that. We also talked about the diffusers just now. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Lutfi, would you like to start this one?
Okay. So first, I know I said this last time, but I have to say it again, that this is such an important project and of such an exciting project, because it is, I mean, as we all know, the Apollo Theater played such an important role in the culture of the city, in culture, new culture and music and life being brought up into Harlem, in the African-American community. It's not only a landmark as a building, but it's a landmark in terms of the landscape of how the city and art in New York and culture in New York has evolved. This, I mean, witnessed personally, not only because I grew up in New York, but also because I worked in economic development for quite some time, the struggles that this entity has gone through, the interventions by business people, politicians, ultimately the state and the city, the private sector, some of it working, some of it not working. And finally, it seems like we've reached this wonderful place. And today, and I'm going to echo a little bit of what Sarah so thoughtfully said, today, I think, thank you for thoughtfully for hearing all of our input and for responding in a way that has made this project greatly improved. And I think it's going to make this place an exciting, special place that's going to continue to have a positive impact on the landscape of the city. So just quickly, let me go through a few things. The changes in the lobby, in a way, which might seem like small moves, have made a dramatic positive impact. The flooring in and of itself, which seemed heavy and harsh, is now, with the thinner inlays and the greater spacing between the lines and the slightly lighter color, and with a softened design, I think takes away the distraction and a visual that literally competes with what is around you or would have been around you as you walked in. And I really appreciate the fact, because I know I brought this up, that you moved that interactive space to the front of the lobby from the back, because it continues that what was historically that initial entrance that kind of, drew people in and got them to visually interact with and talk about and, generate excitement before you even move in for the performance. The other additions in the lobby, the lighting additions, changing the style and having it be contemporary but referential to deco, and how it's recessed, and the nice new rhythm in the ceiling is actually quite lovely. And it visually draws your eye down that corridor, which I think is great. And these the additions of the piers and the soffit and the extra detailing around the entrance to the bar area, it dresses up the space in a very wonderful, understated way. And I want to thank you also for toning down that background wall in the bar because it's also now, while it's something that attracts you, it doesn't take away, doesn't compete. Again, the doors, the new doors, you did the same thing. You added detailing, framing with brass. It now speaks more, slightly more to the style in an updated way, the original style, but in an updated way. And it's really very attractive. I'm just going to go. I feel the same way about this is a more balanced approach to the how the vestibule is now being handled with the addition of the 2 windows with what looks like you're distributing materials on the side. I'm not really 100% sure. And I loved the light fixture to begin with, but what you've done here really, by making a bigger statement using the same design, I think really adds some elegance with an update and sparkle in a way that doesn't compete with what else is going on. I love the colors. In terms of the acoustic panels, this is very complicated. I think, you know, my fellow commissioners have already asked some important questions, and I feel like it's a section that's you're gonna have to continue to work with staff on in order to get how you put them up, some of the spacing, et cetera, quite right. So I'm going to sort of defer to everybody on this and with the, you know, feeling confident that you're going to be working out what you need to work out. But I think that the theater space is beautiful. That's
All right.
it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Master.
Yeah, I wasn't here for the first presentation, but I just have to echo Commissioner Lutfi's comments about the importance of the Apollo Theater to our cultural landscape. It's so incredibly important, and you put it so well. I'm so impressed, you know, with the changes that have been done here, especially when you look at what was presented initially and how responsive they've been to the comments. And then what a big difference a lot of the changes have been in terms of the flooring, the articulation, you know, the columns. I think the flooring, I'll go and just make a couple comments. I think the flooring is an incredible improvement. The corner pier that they added on to enclose the stairway is a huge improvement. The lighting fixture is wonderful. How they incorporated the elements of the brass, the articulation. I love the chandelier that they added to the auditorium. I think it fills the space so much better. I think overall, everything that they've presented has been a big improvement and is appropriate. My only comment that I would agree with Commissioner Lutfi is that as they install the acoustic panels, you know, they should also work closely with staff to make sure that it's done well. Other than that, I think they've done a magnificent job.
Thank you. Commissioner Chu?
Yeah, I want to echo my previous two commissioners' comments that the applicant has done a really nice job listening to the comments that were made at the last presentation. And all in all, I think it's a big improvement in terms of proposal to restore or renovate this incredible theater. So through the items, I think starting at the entry, I think that bringing some elevation to that vestibule, a little detail, and helping it with the procession was discussed is an improvement. I think walking down the main lobby, the little detail that was added to the archway into the non-historic area, I think is an improvement. The flooring, I agree with Angie, is much better. The more refined detail of the metal inlay is, I think, is more elegant and less aggressive, and which helps pick up some of the other finer details that were also added. I think that they've done a good job at, I would say, restoring the sense of procession from what is there right now, which was completely removed with the sort of barrel vaulted corridor soffit. So I'm really glad to see the improvement. I also think the light fixture is more appropriate. It is, I would say, a modern version of what seemed to be the historic light fixture pendant that were in those pop-ups. I think that is a good improvement. I also agree that the The doors leading to the auditorium are a big improvement. Once again, I think that the applicant has really looked back at the historic condition and has pushed the proposal to be more in line with the general feeling of movement through the space. Yeah, I think that the large treatment of the elevation, not just the doors, brings more attention. The signage is much improved, I think, from the previous version of graphics. Appreciate the stair soffit to enclose that experience and not leave it open. Again, referring back to the historic condition, more contemporary approach to it. The auditorium, I'm feeling more comfortable about the fabric wrap panel approach. I do appreciate a very minor, but I think important alignment. The seams will not be in your face, but they will be noticeable and give a sense of rhythm around the room, which I think will add to the sense of procession also at the entry lobby. I do want them to work specifically with staff on just the attachment of the fabric battens that will look like go directly fastened into the plaster work behind. So I do want them to work with staff on that. As commented previously about the diffusers, I want the applicant to work with staff on finding the most appropriate layout. It could be just some minor adjustment, but to work with the existing ceiling dimensions and give proper or ample space to trim around the perimeters. And lastly, I would say the chandelier, I think, is an improvement to the existing condition. It is a new element, but it does have a more appropriate scale. And I actually appreciate the sort of light airiness of it, so it doesn't feel too heavy within the historic space. That's it.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
Commissioner Goldblum?
Thank you. I agree that I think the application is generally appropriate. I think that the floor improvement is significant. I still have concerns about it. I think that the design of the lobby, for me, it's hard to kind of walk that line between a historic recreation and an interpretation of a historic space. There is no historic material here, so anything that's a little bit better is a little bit better, and by that measure, this certainly is a little bit better. But I worry that the detailing of the pilasters and the chair rail and the base is underdeveloped and might have a generic mall quality to it. I still think that the light fixture, although it is improved, is too low at 9'2". I think that it could be raised and made shorter. It still does suppress. I mean, it's 2 feet lower than the cove line. I think it should be higher. I think that the vestibule changes are significantly improved. I was sitting here, I did a quick survey of big theater spaces with big old theater spaces and their air conditioning needs. I can't find one that has monster grills that you could kind of fall through like these. So I'm not sure that this is the only way to solve this problem. And I think that the visual impact on a historic decorative ceiling is significant. I have no problems with didn't have any problems with the acoustical panels before. I'm not a big fan of the chandelier in the center, but I don't think it's inappropriate.
Right, thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg.
I agree with most of what my fellow commissioners said. I first want to thank you for listening to us and then coming back and looking at issues raised and improving things. That's appreciated. I also understand, having dealt with it, how national park standards are not quite our standards, and that can cause issues. And I tend to think the national park standards are pretty good. And I think you've done a really good balance on that. And I won't repeat all of what my fellow commissioners have said, I really like the light fixtures, and I think that there is a real issue that our technology, our requirements, our energy efficiency have all changed. And so you want something that feels like it fits, but it's not going, when there are none of the historic fixtures, you're not going to get there. I would agree with Stephen's comments about the mechanical ducts and just trying to locate them better. And the one thing I'd say, and this is a maintenance issue, painting them white, we'll paint them out till the dirt gets on them. And if they're not cleaned on a regular basis, they will become much more noticeable. But I think this is a very good job and as an important institution and landmark, and I'm very happy to find this appropriate.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, I just want to echo the fellow commissioners' comment how important this iconic institution is. People travel from around the world, from Japan, just to see the structure. So, and you are in the hands of a very capable team. And I want to echo some of the comments. I think the terrazzo, the thinning of the brass divider, all contributed to an improvement thanks to all the commissioner suggestions. I love the treatment of the progression to the orchestra door with the brass. I think the chandelier in the auditorium is a vast improvement. And I think the word is the progression. My main concern remains the ceiling lighting on this lobby. Given as Michael Goldblum and Commissioner Ginsburg alluded to, given this lack of historic reference standard, and the applicants mentioned about, what are you trying to emulate or sort of, and whether it's Art Deco or whether, but I think it's not quite theatrical to me at this moment. Somehow, this is just my personal gut feeling. I think that if there's a way to really, whether it's the alignment, whether it's some sort of, because there is a progression from, the outside sidewalk, the marquee, the lobby, the hallway, and that the unifying ceiling, the easiest element is besides the floor is the ceiling, but you'll be crowded on the floor. So the only thing that you will see most of the time, that unifying element is the guidance, the wayfinding element is the ceiling. So for me, the personal thing is about, I think you are in good hands with a good team, and I think I'd love to see how you can improve upon that.
Okay, so are you thinking about the size or the lowering the height? Commissioner Ginsburg, I'm not sure you said anything about it. You didn't have an issue with these lights, did you?
You guys are like, I'm the opposite. No, I'm the opposite.
Is it the height or is
I
it?
think Stephen mentioned, or either Michael or Stephen mentioned.
Michael talked about the height of them.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Chapin?
Yeah, I also want to say this is just terrific to see the restoration of this wonderful venue. And I think the changes that the applicant has made, responsive to comments, are all right in the right place. The terrazzo floor, the changes to the progressional light fixtures, whether they should be higher or not, I leave to others to comment on. As far as I'm concerned, the approach is the right approach. I think that the changes to things like the soffits and the coffered ceiling, and to the entrance doors, to the I think it's the orchestra space, are all, I think, right on, just the right thing to do. And I think that, everything that I see, I can approve. And I was very happy with actually the closer explanation of the chandelier. which I now get a much better sense of how it would look. And I think that also is a good, is a good choice. So I'm happy with everything. I think that I'd just like to make sure that they work with the staff on protecting the plaster work and in the auditorium. And other than that, I can approve everything. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, so I think we have a consensus to approve with a few tweaks. One is that they continue to work with the staff on the installation detail for the acoustic panels, and the other is to work with the staff on the final layout of your HVAC diffusers. So we'll go ahead and make that motion, Commissioner Lutfi.
In the matter of docket 28-1008 to 53 West 125th Street, Apollo Theater, originally Hurtig and Siemens New Burlesque Theater, individual and interior landmark. A neoclassical style theater building with a classically inspired interior design by George Keister and built in 1913-14. Application is to use substitute materials at historic signage and alter portions of the designated interior. I note that the lobby was previously renovated in the 1930s and 1960s, resulting in the removal of most historic finishes, but retaining a high level of spatial integrity. I further note that at the September 15th, 2005 and October 18th, 2005 public hearing and meeting, the commission reviewed LPC docket 06-0241 and voted to approve the installation of new interior finishes and signage at the lobby. However, a permit was never issued and the work was not undertaken. Finally, I note that the marble wainscoting and fabric panels were installed in the auditorium in the 1980s. I recommend approval with some modifications, finding that the installation of LED tube lighting at the exterior marquee and blade sign will greatly improve energy efficiency and ease of maintenance, with only a slight change to the appearance of the lettering compared to the original neon tubing. That probes indicate that the historic terrazzo flooring is severely deteriorated and that otherwise the interior finishes have been removed and the historic photograph collage art will be relocated within the designated interior lobby. Therefore, the work will remove only a small amount of historic fabric. That the proposed design reflects a contemporary interpretation of the historic interior lobby based on historic photographs. That the projecting pilasters, wainscoting, coffered ceiling, and hanging light fixtures will evoke in a contemporary manner details that were historically found within the building, will restore the historic configuration and rhythm of the lobby, and will help to unify the lobby and vestibule areas. That the terrazzo flooring with thin brass inlays recalls the materials of the historic flooring while evoking the font of the iconic exterior Apollo signage. That the glass fiber reinforcement gypsum elements will not be seen within the context of any extant historic plaster work and will feature smooth seams with a final painted finish that will recall the finishes and details of historic plaster and will help bring the lobby closer to its historic appearance. That internally illuminated wayfinding signage and LED screens will incorporate new text technology while recalling poster boxes typically found at this and other theater buildings. That the new wall openings in the lobby will facilitate better circulation and accessibility within the lobby, and that changes in flooring and lighting will clearly demarcate the transition between designated and non-designated interior spaces. That the shouldered corners at the new lobby openings will differentiate these openings as new interventions while subtly harmonizing with the typical rectilinear openings found throughout the designated space. That the metal doors between the lobby and the auditorium featuring a panel transom, brass finish, and Apollo lettering will allow for compliant, barrier-free accessibility while recalling the solidity and paired configuration of the historic doors. That the proposed finishes, seating, and carpeting in the auditorium will harmonize with the historic paint finishes and bring the theater closer to its historic appearance. That the relocation of the sound and lighting booth and installation of seating at the back of the auditorium will be consistent with the historic seating configuration and improve patron circulation. That the new bar areas at the mezzanine and balcony will not be permanently affixed to the flooring. The finishes will harmonize with the overall interior finishes, and the design and scale of the installations are simple and modest and will not detract from the overall sense of the auditorium volume. That there is no historic documentation of the original chandelier in the auditorium, and the proposed chandelier and wall sconces will be well scaled, easily reversible, and will not call attention away from the volume of the space or from the decorative plaster work. That the utilitarian elements, including HVAC diffusers, recessed lighting, and speakers, will be installed at areas of flat plaster work and feature neutral finishes. Therefore, they will not call undue attention to themselves. That the acoustic panels will only be installed above the balcony level and will be covered with fabric matching the finish of the historic plasterwork and other fabric wall coverings, thereby helping to recede from view, and that the proposed work will support the ongoing theater use without diminishing the special architectural character of the interior and individual landmark. I recommend that the applicant an acceptable plan for the documentation and protection of the auditorium plasterwork be prepared in consultation with staff, and that the applicant continue to work with staff on the installation details for the acoustic panels that will minimize the impact to historic fabric, and that the applicant work with staff on the final layout of the HVAC diffusers.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chu, would you second that motion?
Second.
John, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu, Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum, Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Master.
Aye.
8 in favor, none opposed. The motion passes.
That's approved, and please continue to work with the staff. And while we had 6 votes for the lobby light fixtures, if you do wish to think about their height some more, aligned with some of the comments we've heard, that would be welcome, but not required. So thank you for this wonderful application, and good luck. We'll move to the next item.
Next item is public meeting item number 5, LPC 21-05596. An application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Staten Island, block 246, lot 56, 1197 Clove Road, the John King Vanderbilt House individual landmark. This is a Greek Revival style residence built circa 1836. The application is to construct new buildings situated on the landmark site. This was read into the record at the public hearing of November 14th, 2023, but was not presented, and no public testimony was taken at that time. So it'll be presented for the first time today, and we'll have the staff present the proposal after we open the hearing.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to open the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is open.
And Sarah, if I could say a few words before the presentation. Commissioners, as Corey explained, this is a proposal for 2 new buildings behind the individual landmark John King Vanderbilt House. You'll see in the presentation photographs of the landmark building. It's in very poor condition. There was a fire a number of years ago. It's been vacant for many years. The commission has an active demolition by neglect lawsuit against the owner for the failure to maintain the building. The owner is the applicant today before you. We're now in the lawsuit discussing settlement, and any settlement of the lawsuit would have as its overarching goal extensive repairs to the building along with some financial penalty. But more significantly, the owner is in the process of selling the building. contract has been signed, the deposit has been made, and the purchaser will be making repairs to the landmark building. There might be concern that if the commission approves these two new buildings at the rear of the landmark site, what guarantees do we have that repairs will actually be made to the landmark building? And so what we've done is have the purchaser and the seller sign an agreement where they've agreed that if any new construction is approved on the landmark site, the commission staff would not sign off on that work until the landmark building has been returned to a condition of good repair. And that means if we don't sign off on any new construction, DOB then will not issue a C of O, and that property can't be occupied or sold. In addition, there's an agreement that there will be an escrow amount set up for repairs to the building. And as repairs are made to the landmark building, that escrow will be drawn down to reimburse the purchaser for those repairs. So right now we have these three mechanisms in place between the lawsuit, the agreement that no sign-off will be given until repairs are made, and the escrow that will be set up to ensure that if there is an approval of these new buildings behind the landmark house, the landmark house will be repaired. And the scope of work has been explained to the purchaser and to the seller. The John King Vanderbilt house needs roof work, needs extensive work on the siding. The porch needs to be rebuilt. There's structural work that is needed inside where there was a fire. Repointing is necessary, new windows, new doors, and the house has to be painted. So that scope of work has been explained to the purchaser and to the seller. So everyone's on the same page about that. And finally, I think it's important just to make it clear that I'm just explaining this to give you some context and background, and the standard of review for this project is, as it would be for any other project for you, the appropriateness of the two buildings that is the proposal before you. So just consider the proposal as you would any other application. Is this work appropriate for the landmark site?
Be clear, the applicant presenting today is the purchaser, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
But the purchaser is the one who made repairs to build the houses.
Got it. Okay. All right, Richard.
Good morning, Commissioners. Richard Lai, Preservation Staff. So I'll give a brief presentation on the proposal, and the architect, Ron Victoria, will discuss the design rationale and answer any questions. So the proposal on Clove Road, John King Vanderbilt house, you can see from the site plan, the shape of the designated area. There is a lot immediately to the north where a third house is proposed that is not part of this scope of work. The only reason that we mentioned it is that with the process is that once that is complete, that will fund the restoration for John King Vanderbilt house.
So it's off the landmark site.
Yeah, but it's a rectangular lot immediately to the north of the pink lot, which is the designated area. So the third house, we'll see some details, but it's really not part of the scope of this discussion for this application. There's just again the site plan, again the bordered in the sort of hatched red area, showing the John King Vanderbilt house on the left. Immediately behind that, there's actually foundations for another building that never was realized, but there is some development there currently. And then the adjacent lot immediately above that where the third building is. Just to give you a sense of the aerial, just to show you the subject lot in red. There is a little area marked in yellow, which would be the extension of Waldron Road, which would then provide access to the proposed two new buildings. Again, it leaves the front of the John King Vanderbilt house completely left alone. There would be no development whatsoever in front of it, from the Clove Road or from Waldron Road. Also, you can just see that there's a number of other sort of residential properties surrounding this site, both to the north and to the east. Here's a sort of proposed lot layout for the two new buildings tucked behind the John King Vanderbilt house that you see in gray. And just to give you a sense of the sort of the view from sort of Clove Road looking up, the site does slope up to the John King Vanderbilt house and continues up to the back of the lot and onto the buildings on the adjacent lots. And just a close up from the front of the house, just showing John King Vanderbilt and the current state of disrepair. So here's just a quick section just showing the relationship of a restored John King Vanderbilt house on the left with the two properties, two other buildings behind that. Again, showing the slope of the site. And again, just again from the front on Clove Road looking up, showing John King Vanderbilt on the right with the proposed buildings on the same lot behind it. And then on the extreme left, you see the building that's on the separate lot that's not part of this application. Sorry, one other thing just to note, both the roofs of the two proposed buildings will sit lower than the roof of John King Vanderbilt. Just some elevations of the two buildings. So this is the one that's closest to John King Vanderbilt. And the one that's furthest away. And this is the one that's on the separate lot. Here's just some renderings just to show sort of the relationship of the two buildings to the individual landmark. Both the top from Waldron Avenue, again the bottom, basically from sort of the bottom of Waldron Avenue towards Clove Road, and then Clove Road looking up. And then just to give you a sense of sort of there's a wireframe of the sort of the closest building that's proposed behind there, and that's in relation to how it would sort of look behind the individual landmark. And again, just to get a wireframe analysis, it's a little misleading. Again, it's not sort of that exposed behind there. So there's sort of mature plantings and other buildings. And then with the new buildings, again, proposing to do in sort of hardy plank clapboard construction, and then with sort of regular asphalt shingle tiles. We do have samples here if anyone, but I think everyone's familiar with them. Currently, at the individual landmark, that's the roofing material. A lot of the interior of John King Vanderbilt is surprisingly intact from a recent site visit that we did with staff. So I think the idea with the proposed design is to sort of harmonize with the individual landmark, and Ron will go into a little bit more detail on his sort of design rationale and how he has sort of discussed, modified the design's massing to sort of complement the individual landmark. So I'll hand you over to Ron Victoria for the art.
Thank you.
Thank you. Still, good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present this project. I've been an architect involved with this project over probably the last 15 years. We've worked with staff and presented numerous proposals, anywhere from medical facilities to museums, to the possible even request to relocate the building to a previously relocated Valentine House just up the hill a bit. But that couldn't be purchase of that, which is owned separately, just never came to fruition. I personally think that after all the suggested possibilities for this project, that this is the most viable, the most aesthetically pleasing, and satisfies the LPC's requirements that will guarantee the restoration of the current home being utilized for its original use as a residence. I think it blends harmoniously with the adjoining neighborhood, and the modest construction of two houses do not over detract from the mansion, not the mansion, but the JKV house. We've preserved the view of the JKV house from two street exposures. There's a lot of mature foliage that doesn't really show in the renderings because they would have hidden the houses. But as you can see, there's a lot of mature foliage where the development of these two houses would be probably completely obscured from the street views. So I'd like to go to the site plan. This probably says it all. The concept here is that the house on the northerly site, which has it's a three-story house and has a garage underneath, is a non-landmark property. The profits from the purchaser on this home would be dedicated towards the restorative costs for the JKV house. The two other new buildings, one would replace the previous foundations that were there in the 70s that were going to allow the possibility of townhouses to be built. Subsequently, that was put on hold. So the house close, the new building or the MB closest to the JKV house will remove those foundations, and we have two houses located behind. We've increased the street frontage well beyond the zoning requirement of 15 feet. I think they've been stepped back some 25 feet from the street. Again, giving that street wall line and a little bit of separation from the street, and putting the houses almost behind the current JKV house to obscure once again the view. There is a curb cut existing on Clove Road that gives access to the JKV house on the northerly side, where to relocate that parking pad so you don't see a car parked from the street. We're actually having that off of Waldron Avenue in a shared curb cut with one of the new buildings, and that parking space will be directly behind the home. And this is easier access to the home. The parking space would give rear access to the home, which would be the kitchen area, and I think it's an appropriate area for the parking space. The property is also located in the Special Hillside District. CPC has jurisdiction and guidelines over retainage of trees, tree credits, modification of topography. This is less than a 10% slope. We do not have to file with CPC, but we do have to adhere to their guidelines for modification of topography and to maintain a certain amount of tree credits. Trees that are within 15 feet of the development can be removed as of right. There are a significant amount of trees that are in the DOT property. The DOT application will be filed for expanding the street at least to the rear property line of the landmark site. Determination will be made by DOT whether this becomes a through street and extends to the other side of Waldron Avenue where there are homes currently placed. There is a guardrail approximately between the lightly shaded portion of Waldron Avenue and the darker shaded portion in the brown of Waldron Avenue. That guardrail would be removed. It would be moved to the rear property line of the property of the street, and or removed completely if DOT determines they want to make it a through street. Some of the other factors that we tried to do here, and Richard had touched base. We originally proposed the two new buildings to have garages only because that's an acceptable commodity on Staten Island to get the cars off the street, not be maintained or parked in the front of the house, but parked within the structure. In order to do that, there's a slope calculation in order to get into that driveway to make, into that garage to make it usable. This projected up and made them 3-story houses. It was a recommendation from staff to try and get the houses lower into the ground, keep them at 2 stories, and that an off-street parking pads for the dwelling units, which we 2 cars for each dwelling unit, was more appropriate in this case, and we did comply with that. And to my agreement. Also, the house closest to the JKV house, the rear portion of the roof is sloped as to not distract from the overall massing of the JKV house versus the NB. I think this is the very important section showing that we're doing the least modification to the property, that the overall sizes of the home nowhere come close to satisfying the floor area ratio or the lot coverage. They are in scale. They do not compete. The JKV house will remain the pinnacle of the structure on the knoll. Visually, this section again is we don't have the trees and the mature trees that will block it, but when viewed from Waldron Avenue or from the corner of Clove Road and Waldron Avenue, I don't even believe these houses during the foliage season will even be visible. The sensitivity of the proposed developer on the non-landmark site, we are still going to fenestrate the exterior of the facade in character with the other 2 homes, but once again, not compete with the architectural elements of the JKV house. These are just some plain renderings just to show you the window treatment, the roofs, the sloping roof at the rear indicated on the right side exterior elevation. Again, not to act as a giant billboard behind the JKV house. The introduction of a plain porch, again, complementing harmoniously, but not replicating the front porch on the JKV house. And these will all be soft tone colors, once again, to not be dominant. We're not using blue tones or yellow tones or any of that. They'll all be complementing and soft tones on the exterior siding. We've attempted to superimpose once again and cut out some of the trees that are on the street frontages, but this would be the approximate placement and once again the massing. I think the 3D top view really emphasizes the placement of the homes and the non-compete with the JKV home. Again, Richard mentioned this, that would be if you saw through the trees or maybe the fall foliage, the profile of the house that you would see behind the JKV house. This was a wireframe showing the stepping, and once again, the ridge lines of the 2 proposed buildings are below the JKV house. This was an important element that staff wanted and to reduce the dominancy of these 2 new buildings that were proposed. And again, the cladding, which would be hardy plank. We're not going to be using vinyl on these buildings. Again, they will meet all the New York State Energy Code requirements. The restoration of the house, I think it's important to get it up. I think that will reduce the deterioration of the siding, the paint. We need to get an environmental system in there for air conditioning and heating again. The basic JKV house, the 2-story portion of the structure is structurally stable. There was a significant fire damage to the rear. There were 2 additional additions built to the JKV house, which extended the kitchen area of the home. They will all be reconstructed. We will replicate and put wood siding on that to match the clapboard, the windows, and the roofing. And these are important elements to the home because, again, architecturally, those will be the kitchen and dinette areas to support the family living in the house. Once again, I'd just like to thank the commissioners for this presentation. Again, I feel that this is the most appropriate proposal for the development. I think it satisfies both the aesthetic restoration of the JKV house and blends harmoniously with the community.
Great, thank you. And just a question for staff, is the other restoration work on the John King Vanderbilt house eligible for staff level review, and we're not actually looking at the details of that today? Okay, great. All right, commissioners, any questions on the proposal? Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg.
What is the square footage of the new buildings and the JKV house?
If I can go to the first chart. So this property will, when the landmark meets and bounds, it's not being changed. This is going to be what we call one zoning lot with 3 separate.
So
tax
that isn't
lots.
the question I'm asking.
I know, but I
Okay.
just wanted to ask that. So what I'm getting at is the FAR will be combined for the all 3 new buildings taken against the zoning lot. The first sheet will give you those square footages. Can't zoom in on this.
Excellent. Where is it?
Type is a little small. So the JKV house, we're talking net square footage. This doesn't include cell areas. Is 2,800. The proposed houses are 2,400, both of them.
So just to add to that, what, so I'm just curious, how many like bedrooms and
3
baths
bedrooms.
for both and 3 baths?
There's 3 bedrooms, and then the second floor would include an open area for possibly a flexible space that could be a small home office, but it's not a bedroom.
In all 3 or in the new ones?
In all 2 NPs.
Yeah, okay.
For the landmark property, yes. And each one of them is 1 fair.
Yeah, 1 fam. So can I just ask the staff something? I'm just Staten Island is a driving community. People have cars. And these 2 homes are being developed so that there are parking pads and not garages, which I'm assuming that a lot of homes have. What if a new owner came to us and said they wanted to build a garage?
They would have to come to a public hearing and ask the commission to consider it.
But it is possible, even though based on what we heard, it wasn't, you said it could.
The garage.
Yeah.
If someone came to you for a garage, it would have to be a fully detached garage and located in the rear 30 feet of the property. It would be impossible to modify the existing garage to get access into what is now the cellar area to park a vehicle, because the setback wouldn't provide the 11% maximum slope for the driveway to enter the garage. So a built-in garage would not be feasible.
There could be one, but it would have to be.
In the back, so it could have the
And
driveway.
that would be filed as a new building with the Department of Buildings, would require a separate C of O and would require LPC approval prior to DOB approving the application.
Okay, Commissioner Ginsburg.
So a 2,400 square foot 3-bedroom, you can do it in half the size. Did you need to do that size because of the prevailing market in the area, or?
That's very, very good that you said that. Yes. So on Staten Island, we know that in Manhattan and in other boroughs that 1-unit dwellings can be much, much smaller. These houses, again, to meet the market value that needs to get the return to restore the house, purchase the property, development of the property, and then provide a small amount of profit. We needed 2 new buildings of this market size to get the return.
I'd point out that outside of the other boroughs, there are a lot of smaller houses. It isn't only. Then my other question is the color selection of the new houses. Did you consider just making them white or just slightly off-white instead of colors that make them stand out more?
My original presentation to the LPC staff was white, and we didn't want to replicate the JKV because the JKV house will be whitewashed. So we were going to do a light tone, and those colors will be worked on with staff.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Yes, Commissioner Goldblum, followed by Commissioner Chu.
So this is for staff. What's the history in the commission of allowing for developments, new buildings on on this kind of lot where it's an individual landmark? I'm familiar with the Flag House and its the number of developments proposed there. Are there others that might be relevant to this particular application?
I would just say, Commissioner, that we have allowed individual development on individual landmark sites, depending on the circumstances of the size of the lot and other things. Nothing comes to mind specifically like this, but there are many other examples where we have allowed development to occur on landmark sites.
Yeah.
Depending on circumstances.
And specifically in Staten Island, right? So we just recently saw the Valentine Smith House where we approved buildings at the back, right? As part of a larger project. It was a Victorian house and there were 4 buildings on the landmark site and others.
That was the main guy.
Oh, no. It was a Victorian house. And then the Manny Seguin house, which is another house that we were very, very concerned about the condition, and we had sued the owners for demolition by neglect. We did approve 4 townhouses actually in front of the Manny Seguin house. The Manny Seguin house sat at the back of the lot, and we approved 4 townhouses in front, which involved a new road in the middle of the front yard to create fire access. So we did that. And then the Flag Cottages near Flag Estate. We've also approved
Right.
subdivisions
One
of
house.
those. Yeah, there's
new
2
house.
of those.
Yeah.
2 different applications for 2 Flag Cottages
Mhm.
where the site was subdivided. So those are 4 in Staten Island that I can think of, or 5 actually, if you count Flag Estate.
Yeah, just the Kreischer House a couple of years ago. We
Oh, I think
approved,
that's the one I
several
was thinking of.
townhouses behind an individual landmark.
That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
And so I don't remember the townhouse example, but I do remember the cottages example. And I'm trying to remember what our approach was regarding the relationship of the architecture to the designated houses. If I'm not mistaken, I remember vaguely the new house that was kind of next to the cottage that was on the corner. There's like a house that was kind of set back with a little backyard pavilion or something. And in that case, I believe that we specifically wanted not only to modify visibility relative to the flag house, but also we asked for a kind of architectural relationship between the houses, materiality, roofing styles, dormer styles, if I'm not mistaken. Is that?
Yeah,
that
so on the
generally,
flag houses, yeah, that's what I remember, that not the big project for the Flag Estate, but the 2 other cottages. They were both sort of behind the cottage, and so we wanted the roof lines to be lower or to align, and that there be some relationship in terms of materiality and style, but more subdued. And in both cases, they were
Right.
also sort of a slightly different set of proportions for modern needs. Yeah.
So given that, go ahead. Sure.
It's important and relevant is the site directly adjacent to this site is a site with a commission. So the site where you're looking below to see the site below with the big parking lot, that is a site that was partially on a landmark site. There's a historic house behind it that was closer to that lot that we, through a special permit, allowed the house to be actually moved back to provide more space for that corner building.
Yeah.
Because it was a similar situation where it was a house that needed a substantial repair and needed to sort of use this development to help it move forward. So
Yeah.
that's another example, I think, that's right next door.
Okay, and so so what you're saying is that the area where there's the letter P in the little gray, that's adjacent to another house that's the green with the green roof?
Yeah, this
Right.
This is the historic house.
Right, and that was moved up.
Back, and it was
Okay.
also for the development allowed. It never happened.
Right.
Along the existing boulevard.
And then at the Manny Seguin house, because it was an early Dutch colonial house, the new townhouses didn't actually have that same relationship, or the roof heights were obviously taller than they were.
Understood.
So that was kind of a different situation because of the site conditions.
What I'm getting at is this. As the applicants noted, the intention or the focus of the commission's work with him has been to try to reduce the visual impact of the new houses on the historic house, with little regard paid to the architecture design of those houses, which the applicant said relate more to the neighborhood at large as opposed to the house itself, the landmark house itself. And I'm just trying to understand whether we think that that's the right way to go, or whether we think that's not the right way to go.
So at Manny Seguin, I would say that the houses in front would related to the larger neighborhood and not the Manny Seguin house. With the flag cottages, the one element that really tied the two together was the stone, and the new houses were able to incorporate stone into the base. I think we did look at the pitch and slope of the roof
Dormers
lines
too.
and the dormers. Yeah.
Design of those dormers was very distinct, if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
But just
And
to add
then-
to
yeah.
with the flag project, with the single family house, I mean, I think part of the logic of that design approach and using some of the materiality and design features that Flag would have is because Flag himself wrote that manual on designing small cottages.
Mhm.
And there was already that sort of context of multiple buildings designed in a certain way, whereas this is a house by itself, not by Flag, obviously, or not by anyone else who sort of had a master plan or a vision.
Right.
Right.
That's
And
right.
I was looking also in the designation report, and I didn't get through the whole thing, but is there a significance to the setting of the house on the property that's considered significant to its designation?
Well, I don't.
Not that we're aware of.
Yeah, and right. I mean, it's an early house, so it would have been in our more rural areas.
Right.
But I don't think it was a landscaped or planned green space around
Thank
it.
you.
But Richard, and maybe you could also just talk a little bit about the relationship between the houses at Kreischer and how they related to the Kreischer house. I think they were also, in that case, it was a Victorian, so there was a color palette, I think, that they related to, but the style didn't relate, right?
Yeah, they again, it wasn't necessarily trying to replicate what Kreischer had, but it was to harmonize. So certain design elements were sort of simplified, but incorporated. And again, with the color palette for the clapboards, they were, Kreischer had some very ornamental woodwork with some fairly bright colors, and the new buildings, the new multi-unit townhouses were a little bit more subdued, again, to maintain the focus on the individual landmark. And these were all either set behind or below, so that, again, there was not much of a visual impairment. I think the commissioners were very keen on maintaining the sort of the view corridor in front of the individual landmark.
Right, the sort of the primacy of the individual landmark.
It just also on that project, I mean, I think the architect proposed a certain vision for that one, and that's what we came in with and what the commission worked with and ultimately found appropriate. It obviously could have been some other approach as well, but also those were just very different buildings in scale. They're multifamily units that were much longer, taller. They were depressed on the site, so the individual landmark still was prominent up on the hilltop, but just completely different building types. So I think that came into play for that project as well.
Yeah. Okay, yes, Commissioner Chu and then Commissioner Chen. Thank you.
Is the existing lot currently subdivided, or is it being subdivided by this application?
I'll answer that. So there will be a subdivision application. We filed with DOF right now, the Department of Finance, for tentative tax lots. So you have tax lots and then you have zoning lots.
Right.
It would remain one zoning lot, which is in keeping with the meets and bounds description of the landmark property. And then each individual house will have its own tax lot number for house number purposes, billing purposes, and pay their portion of the taxes based on the square footage and the frontage of that individual lot. And that's why I had mentioned earlier that there is a marriage here. Lot coverage, floor area is
Right.
taken against the overall
Zoning lot.
the zoning.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, and just on the Flag Estate, of course, there were the houses we looked at in recent years, but then there was the entire development
Right,
further
started.
back. Yeah. Okay, Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, just to follow up on the garage issue. Oh, by the way, the latest news nationally is the size of the houses are getting reduced. That for whatever reason. Follow up on the issue of the garage. What is to prevent somebody from coming back to this commission by saying, I want to park in front? I'm not going to do the back-to-back, given how do you want to get home and there's a car behind you and you're a single row with two cars?
So the zoning resolution provides a section, I don't know the exact section, but the rear, assuming that you pull into the accessory parking area, okay? The back of the vehicle has to be behind the front facade of the structure. A lot of people believe that they can park in their driveway. That's not an accessory parking space. That's access to either the built-in parking space or the accessory garage.
So in your case, do you have space in the back?
This is the driveway giving access to the parking space. It's not that clear on here, but you'll see a dotted X line. That is actually the accessory parking spaces. This is the accessory parking space for this unit. And you will see that the dotted line is behind this front street wall of each structure. There's a distinct difference between a driveway to access your parking area or built-in space and the actual parking space.
All right, any other questions? All right, let's move to public testimony and we'll come back and I'll note that there's, sorry? No, I've got them here. And there's no one in the hearing room to speak on this item, so I'll turn it over to Gregory Kala to see if we have any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have a couple of remote participants with their hands raised. The first person we'll be hearing from is Jeremy Woodoff from Victorian Society of New York. Jeremy Woodoff, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Woodoff, speaking for the Victorian Society, New York. Well, the information that Mr. Weiss gave us a few minutes ago, we did not have previously, so we couldn't consider it and incorporate it into our testimony. While the conditions that are being imposed sound promising, we suspect they're not sufficient. For example, what if the profits on the sales of the new buildings aren't sufficient to fund the restoration of the house, which seems a likely occurrence. And the second is, if new houses are allowed to be built and only the certificate of occupancy withheld, we think that's very risky. There are many residences in the city occupied without C of Os. Now I'll go to the testimony we had prepared. In our view, the main issue here is the appalling condition of the individual landmark. This must be addressed first and foremost in any discussion of the appropriateness of building houses on the landmark site and reducing by more than half the designated open space around the individual landmark. The presentation materials include one small drawing implying restoration of the landmark, but notes like railing system to be verified, round wood columns, and vinyl cedar shakes do not inspire confidence in the applicant's intent. The details of the 3 proposed new houses or the 2 on the landmark site are not much more complete. An ironclad mechanism to ensure the restoration and maintenance of the landmark should be in place before issuance of permits for the new buildings. This can take the form of requiring the restoration to be completed first. Another way is to create an escrow account held and administered by a third party, such as the Landmarks Conservancy. And that the amount of that escrow should be determined first, and it should be in place first. We also believe that the loss of so much of the landmark site warrants creation of a preservation easement and maintenance fund for the designated house. We do not think there is much point in addressing the design of the proposed new buildings until assurances for the restoration and future maintenance and protection of the landmark are in place. We recommend, however, that any new buildings be set back on the lots so that their street facades don't project beyond the facades of the Vanderbilt house. Doing so will help retain sight lines to the landmark. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. Lucy Levine, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC also did not have the information about the conditions imposed in this circumstance before writing this testimony. So HDC supports Staten Island Community Board 1's position that the John King Vanderbilt House should be restored before any new work proceeds on this landmark property. Regarding that new work, we find the massing to be generally appropriate, but we have concerns with the siting in relationship to the landmark. Further, we believe that the proposed design lacks detail. We believe the applicant should look to the landmark house as precedent. We ask the Commission to take no action on this proposal and to require the applicant to come back with a proposal that takes these issues into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any further attendees with their hands raised, so I will note for the record that Staten Island Community Board 1 recommends approval. And with that, I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
I'd like to ask if you'd like to respond to the comments we've heard. In particular, there's the restoration work, but also the siting of the houses in relation to the landmark and any relationship between the design materials to the landmark that you might want to express a little bit more.
So during this process, both architecturally, we've dealt with Richard and staff, in addition to communication with Mr. Weiss. Mr. Weiss was very involved in this project because of the litigation that was taking place. The current owner, as Mr. Weiss is well aware of, has been slightly neglectful on the restoration of this house. It was in the best interest of the JKV house for the sale of this property to give it to a more appropriate developer who has a track record on Staten Island for starting and finishing projects. Architecturally, my consideration, again, was to non-compete with the design of these houses against the fairly simple design of the JKV. We did not want to replicate the details, such as the roof, which is a hip roof, which would have increased the massing of the 2 MBs, and with the lowest style hip roof. some of the more harmonious details that we did include from the JKV house was the inclusion of a covered porch on the structure nearest. The clapboard siding, of course, would not be of made wood, but a cementitious product hardy plank, which I'm sure the LPC commissioners are familiar with. So that introduction, staying with the double hung window styles, whether we complement and go with muttons on the windows or 1/1 or 6/6 will be discussed with the staff level. These are not construction drawings. These are just developments and conceptual drawings. All these details, whether it's a round column, a square column, will all be done with at the staff level. Coloring, clapboard siding, roof, we're dealing with an architectural shingle. We're not going to put green roofs or red roofs on these buildings. Once again, it will complement but not compete with these architectural elements of the JKV house.
Okay, thank you. I think some of the details you described, we're going to have to work out in this process with the commissioners at commission level, but appreciate the response. Commissioners, any other questions? Okay, so let's close the hearing and begin our discussion. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that?
Second.
motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Chu, would you like to start this one?
Hey. Very interesting application. The approach that's been taken here is, if I look at the picture in this street, would be, the plug would be pulled out of the street, it would flow through. So essentially, these two houses will be seen as a continuation of the residential houses outside the landmark district to the side. I guess it'd be the east side. Which makes me question, what are we protecting here? Because the land property ended at the basically what's being drawn as a property line, tax lot line of the historic house. And these are just not on a landmark property, they just be this way, the rhythm of the neighboring houses. My challenge here is trying to understand what we're trying to protect in this being a landmark property in respect to the landmark house that's there. And I think my reaction is not really about the style. I understand the applicant decided to use a non-compete approach, which essentially I sense is just a new construction like the neighboring new construction. But how does that respect the landmark property? I think that if this was designated as a lot because of that house, I feel uncomfortable about the proximity of the house to the historic house. That's the only way I can look at this. Otherwise, is it appropriate, the houses, in terms of style? I think that would be more of a question about what references, because this isn't a specific style that's being referenced. Could it have been a modern style? I think that would be debatable for us. We could discuss that as well. But in relation to respect to the landmark house, my only reaction is that I feel like it's tight. And I'm wondering if there's another approach to this site that maybe respects that proximity to that house. I'm very curious to see what the other commissioners say about that. If we accept the fact that the lot can be a new tax lot next to the historic house, then it's essentially saying that that's enough for that property to sit on. Because I wouldn't see these two new proposed houses, in my mind, looking at it, that they were on a landmark site. That's my challenge here.
Yeah, and I would note that the landmark site would remain what it is, even if they subdivide a
It
lot.
would remain a landmark site, but what's being put on it, I don't feel like has any relation to why it was designated as a landmark site.
Okay.
I'd like to hear
Okay, and I'm going to jump around a little bit. I want to just go to Commissioner Master because you are familiar with the site and may be able to shed some light on how you experience it.
So I'm very familiar with this. And one thing that you have to understand is that Clove and Victory is a very prominent corner. So a lot of people drive by, right? They're two arterials. And for as long as I can remember, when you drove on Clove Road, you saw this house that was dilapidated. It looked abandoned. It was such an eyesore and it made no sense. Because you look at this neighborhood, there's Clove Lakes Park across the street, Silver Lake Golf Course behind. It's a nice neighborhood. There's no reason that this property should have an abandoned house that looked like it was falling down. It was an incredible eyesore. So I feel very strongly that this solution is the best solution because you basically need the funds. Somebody needs to have significant funds in order to restore this house. And I think given the fire and the condition, it's going to be expensive to do this. So I think that this is, in my opinion, this is a great solution to something that's a very, prominent location. The other thing that I will say, and I actually visited this site over the weekend, and I took some pictures. You can't tell from the drawings, but the site from Clove Road, and Clove Road is the only place where it's going to be visible, right? From Clove Road, you even have a hard time seeing the John King Vanderbilt house. And the reason is because it's set back significantly from the road. There's actually mature trees in front of the sidewalk in front. And there's so much shrubbery and trees, mature trees, that you have a limited visibility of the landmarked house and you have almost no visibility of what's behind it because there's so much trees, mature growth, that from Clove Road, you're really not going to see the new construction. And so the only way you can actually see the houses is on Waldron, and Waldron is a dead end street. No one's going to go on Waldron other than from the parking lot of the urgent care behind corner of, or these two houses. You cannot see, you really cannot see. Waldron isn't, maybe they will, maybe they won't, because there's no reason to go all the way through. I think what they're just, right now it's a dead end street. The only person using Waldron is a parking lot for the urgent care. Yeah, you can't see from Clove Road. You can't see the rear from Clove Road at all.
Right, so, and people aren't driving down Waldron.
No one's going to drive down Waldron, except for the people who are going to these two houses or the urgent care parking lot in the rear. And I think that context is extremely important.
Clarify, is that street being opened or not? I assumed it was being opened.
I think the testimony was they're not sure. It'll be up to DOT whether it's opened or not. But I just, well, their intention is to extend it, but it's unclear whether it will be opened and become a through street. That's what the testimony was from the applicant. Yeah. But commissioners, if I can just make one comment, I think that the question about whether there has to be two houses developed on this lot, it's really not before us because that's what the owner and applicant and they're assessing. We should really focus on the sort of appropriateness of the buildings and the proximity and the design and other things like that. Just
The
to
siting, the massing, design and materials.
Mhm.
And so Commissioner Master, do you have thoughts on those aspects?
Yeah, I mean, given that, there is minimal visibility, I think that, these houses seem appropriate. I think they purposefully kept it to 2 stories. I think that they did not have a garage in order to be limit the visibility, any visibility that there would be, to the landmarked site. So, in my opinion, I think that it was very respectful and I think it's appropriate. But I can't say enough that Waldron is literally a dead end street and people just are not going to be driving through Waldron other than as a parking lot. So from Clove Road, which is a main arterial, you will have limited visibility, if any visibility, due to the greenery and the trees, the mature trees that are on this property.
Yeah, and I've also been to the site, and I also know that Waldron doesn't even feel like a road. It doesn't even feel like something you would drive down. It really feels like it's a blocked, although they are extending it, it doesn't seem like something that anyone would go down. And it may be that before we conclude our final review of this, people may want to make a site visit as well, and maybe we can organize something. All right, Commissioner Goldblum.
Okay. So here's my take on it. The project we are being presented with is a argument that the only way to save the house is to build these structures, one off the site, two on the site, that will pay for and fund the renovation of this dilapidated house. Okay, that makes sense from a developer owner perspective. However, from my vantage point, I view this as like the owner of the property, of every landmark property, like every property in New York, is required to maintain their home. And the fact that they allowed the house to become so degraded that it became a near wreck does not form an excuse for raising the number of dollars needed to raise. That's a self-imposed problem. The guy let the house go to seed, and now he's got to spend more money than he wanted, so he's got to build these houses. So I think the premise at the outset should be viewed with skepticism. Had this house been kept in proper maintenance, it would have sold, considering its lovely location, for a considerable amount of money. But now that it's a wreck, it's a loss. And now we have to build 3 new houses to make up for the owner's own negligence. So I don't view this particularly positively from the start. That said, here we are today, and the application before us has precedent. There is precedent for the commission permitting new structures on sites with historic houses on them. So within that precedent and within that approach, I think that the notion of placing new buildings per se on the site is not an inappropriate notion. I also think that in addressing what Angie said, I think that part of the magic of these individual houses that recall an earlier time in New York City's development before the grid, before the development that occurred around it, one of the signals that say to the public, this is different, this is special, is the weird siding. The fact that they don't correspond to the row, that the fact that they are askew or set back or enshrouded in landscaping. I think that's what tells you this is different, this is old, this is something weird, look at it. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to preserve. So I think that the fact that the house is an oddball on Clove Road is appropriate, and that's something to be preserved. And this proposal does not change that. I think that that's a feature. I also think that the issues that Mark discussed at the outset about tying the development of the historic house to the funding is critical. The house has to come first. The house has to be developed in a way that respects its individual historic landmark status. For me, part of the problem with the proposal is, which I think Stephen touched on as well, is the proximity of the new houses, especially the first one, the one that I guess is immediately east of the house, to the historic house. And if I look at the site plan that we have up here, even though at the moment the view from Clove Road in to the new house is relatively obscured. All that really stands between me on the sidewalk on Clove Road and the new house is two very large trees that are very close to Waldron Avenue. The bushes, the shrubs, the weeds, the vines are not governed by the special hillside district and could be mowed down today. The fact that you have a relatively obscured view is probably in large measure due to the poor maintenance on the site. So with that in mind, I look much more at page 16 of 22, even though it's a fairly abstracted image. I view that as a potentially real proximity judgment between the historic house and the two new houses. So that image kind of scares me a little bit. It's the image that shows the photo of the right side elevation of the JKV house juxtaposed with wireframe models of the two new houses. Bingo. Okay. So with that image in mind, I look at the site plan, and what I think is critical is that we get a row of trees and shrubs and landscaping in between the JKV house and the proposed first house to the east. I think that right now, the way that the site is developed or proposed to be developed is that you have a driveway pushed to the edge of the new proposed tax lot on JKV with a skinny zone of shrubs in between, and then another driveway, and then house number 1 of 2, right? I would suggest that the applicant mess with that. First, push the driveway closer to JKV. Second, flip the driveway onto the other side of house number 1. What that does is it puts a nice wide swath of green stuff in between JKV and house 1, which can be filled up with green trees, not little shrubbies that are shown in 3D rendering number 2. Little shrubbies aren't going to do me any good. We need trees. We need to preserve the sense of isolation that house now has, even though we're lopping off a third to a half of the property. So I think that the necessity of having green space in between the historic house and the two houses is not a deal breaker. I think that the driveway for GKV can be a gravel driveway or strips or something that's gentle, that preserves the rural quality of the house. And you have to work with those two big trees. So, but he's already impinging on the root zone, so I'm sure there's a solution for that. But the rural quality of GKV requires full height masking of the new houses, number 1. Number 2, I think that the question of the architecture of the two new houses has to be considered. As was discussed, these houses are on landmark sites. Nobody would know that once they're done. The choice of materials, the choice of style, the detailing, they don't really bespeak a historic district new house. I mean, I look at the Robert Stern houses on the Flag Estate, and no matter what one says about them, they don't look like their neighbors. They have an affinity. They talk to the Flag Estate. And granted, as Corey said, the Flag Estate is different and the cottages are different because Flag was all about subdivision and houses. This is not a conversation that GKV would have had with its neighbors. That said, however, I think that there's an importance to preserving the quality of landmark that this site has. I don't have a formula for how that should be done, but I think the applicant should talk with the staff about how they think it should be done and should come up with an approach that's more than I put a porch on it and I'm keeping the colors muted. Another point that could be made, I think, that would help the relationship is that first house should be pushed back to the legal requirement, which I think is 30 feet in this district. It's now a little bit more than that. So it's how much? 15. And better. So the first house should be pushed as far back on its site as possible. So that again, when we have that view that that was shown with the wireframe, and you can see it here too, you're seeing way too much of that house from Waldron. And if Waldron does get connected, either as a dead end of its own regard or as a through street, the visibility off of Waldron is going to increase. And Waldron is a public way, even in its current dead end state. So I think it merits our consideration. I'll stop there.
Okay, Commissioner Ginsburg.
I'm going to add to what Commissioner Goldblum has said. We're caught between a rock and a hard place. The fact is, this building, landmark building, has not been maintained for a long time. And now you're coming and saying, well, we need to build these other houses to create the money to be able to maintain it. And we also, I understand, need to make a certain profit to be able to do that. My first reaction is these houses are too big. I understand that may destroy the profit. You know, it gets into this situation where I've lived in a 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in the past. But I realized that may not generate enough money. So that puts us in this situation. I took a look at Google Street View of down Waldron, and these houses are probably nicer, in my opinion, than what's there, because they're sort of 60s, 50s tract development, not particularly attractive. But it becomes so with all of that said, I would also say the landscaping is really, really important. And this rendering here is a horror, because it's exactly what I wouldn't want to see, of just lawns, you know, with no trees, no planting. I realize if you plant a tree now, for the next 5 years, it will be small and scraggly, but it will grow up. I would like to know that the existing trees at the corner are in decent shape, because they look fairly old, unmaintained, and they may be not lasting very long. I think Michael's suggestion of flipping the driveway so the 2 driveways for the new house are adjacent, potentially could share the same curb cut, so there was more of a planted barrier. And again, those little shrubs are exactly what you don't want. And I know we're then asking for more work and more time. I would tend to, but I think something more modern for these houses would be better to differentiate it more. But that is a personal preference and so on. But I really think we've just got to look at the site plan. And I'd love to see the houses reduced in size, but that's probably, given the conundrum we're in, not going to work for generating the money we need. And as other commissioners have said, first and foremost, the existing historic landmark needs to be restored. And I know we've now worked that in, so that should happen.
Thank you, Commissioner Chin.
Very helpful comments. This is one site that I wish, when we want to landmark a site, we always said just specific to the structure, the remaining part are normally not. I wish this site is not part of the landmark site. Given as it may, I think it raised a very interesting question, which is that what are we trying to protect here? And I think what is the common denominator for all of us that are struggling with it is obviously, in years to come, walking by this site, you will never think that this rendering is what we approve as a landmark design or landmark site. And I think that's something that I think we are in agreement that is just the best we can do given the circumstances. And I think that, there are many other, and Stephen raised a good point, which is that if we indeed have to protect, which is what the intent is, to protect the original structure to make it enhance it. But I think there's a role here, given that this is a landmark site with two new structures. And to Mark's point about that we should be looking at the design and the context, I don't think this design is currently there.
Thank you, Commissioner Lutfi.
So, as has been mentioned, especially in Manhattan and the 5 boroughs, there are many instances when I'm gonna say someone buys a site or a property that is landmarked, and there might be a structure and they want to develop. Sometimes they want to develop housing. Sometimes they want to develop something else. And we try to figure out, how that can work. And sometimes the architectural building, the new building, could actually be somehow connected to this landmark. And sometimes it's not, but it's on the same site. And so we take that stuff into consideration. I think we have to be thinking broadly in that way here in Staten Island. If a developer comes in and whoever, whether it's the owner or the person who buys this, they're a developer. And when they come into us, they generally come in, I believe you can correct me if I'm wrong, they come in with like a financial plan for how this is going to work. I'm assuming maybe that has been presented to staff, that if they build these 2 homes, the income first from the sale is going to enable the 2 homes. Then I'm guessing the other 2 are going to be flipped and it'll all work together. I have no idea. I almost feel like we don't know enough. Conceptually, I'm okay with the concept. I'm just wondering, should it be 1 home?
Can I just jump? I just want to jump
Yeah.
in and make it clear. The staff is not verifying or in any way substantiating the assumption behind this application that you need 2 houses or 3 if you count the other one to fund anything. Okay, this is a lawsuit. We have sued the owner. The owner's coming in with this proposal. That's what they have. That's their view. This is what they need. The staff has looked at this, and the staff has made recommendations to you based on the appropriateness, not necessarily about any kind of agreement or disagreement of any kind with a financial approach. So you should be looking at this as an appropriateness question.
As an appropriateness, but am I correct? Are you saying, Mark, that we should assume that the funds will be there as a result of this project?
Well, this is what the applicants are saying that they will do. And then we have, and John has worked out various conditions and assurances. So staff is comfortable in this case that given the assurances that this can happen. But I just want to make it clear that we're not, taking a position on the financial aspect of this.
I'm not taking, I'm actually not doing that, but what I am saying is that in other instances, when people come in, they say they can do it. And you're right, we're assuming they can do it. And maybe it's a more sophisticated development situation. So it's not a big leap. I don't know. Anyway, I think that my initial point was that it's not like we haven't seen something like this. We've just seen it in a slightly different context, and we work within it and make our judgments and ask our questions accordingly. So I'm not having a problem conceptually with that in this different horizontal setting. So And I feel that, Commissioner Goldblum made some very good comments, and interesting comments worth thinking about in terms of like making sure that if something is developed, that in no way will the landmark building be, I'm going to say, diminished, because it is not within a separate context that would allow it to be viewed and appreciated for what it is in and of itself. So I'm in favor of that, however that works out. I'm not having a problem with this, based on everything I've said. I'm not having a problem with this conceptually, because it is possible for new construction to happen and near a landmark. And it seems like these projects, from a look and feel standpoint, I personally think they could almost look like anything, but there's been a judgment made that within this particular community, that this is what they should look like and what the sizing should be, and in order for them to sell and in order to gather the money to do whatever has to be done here. Angie, I appreciate your comments. You know the area pretty well. So I think this is a question about, I would have liked if there was one home, but I can deal with two. And I think really the question is about the details, and maybe they need to collect all of the things that we're putting out there and then go away and come back and address them. And we can see if we feel that it works first for the landmark and that the context around it makes sense.
Okay, great. Thank you. Vice Chair Bland?
Wow. I think this is inappropriate. I think Commissioner Chu put his finger on it right from the beginning about an hour ago. When he said, what are we trying to protect and so forth. To me, and Sarah, you said the landmark site will not change its boundaries. So these two buildings, these two highly generic buildings put on the landmark site, to me, are just simply inappropriate. I don't know whether one is better than two, whether something far less generic than these, somehow related to the house. But these two buildings on this site, on this landmark site, negate the whole idea of a landmark site. So we could go on and on about prescribing how it might be different. That's up to the applicant to come back with something that's different. But I view this as wholly inappropriate. Demolition by neglect, I think there was some interesting commentary on that by Commissioner Goldblum. If this were a townhouse, say, in Brooklyn Heights, building demolition by neglect issue, and the owner comes back and says, well, the only way I can solve this problem and renovate the house is to put a wildly inappropriate addition on top. This is in Staten Island, so we don't have townhouse. We have a beautiful 1836 house that's been ignored and neglected for too long. So I don't have much more to say, really, except that this seems wildly inappropriate to me. And the word horror was used by Mark Ginsburg to describe the renderings. But when you come back, I hope much better renderings, much better graphics are used to display what you propose, because this is wildly Makes it very hard for us to understand what's going on. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, okay, so this is, a difficult one, but, first, it sounds like there've been a lot of proposals over time for this site. And as Commissioner Bland expressed, and as the applicant said, we'll work out what this is gonna look like with the staff, and that's not really what should happen here. To say, initially, these new houses don't call attention to themselves, and they fit in the local context and are shorter than the landmark. However, in this situation where they're on the actual site of the landmark, they really, I think, as others have suggested, really need to have a lot more clear relationship that can be picked up through some of the features of the existing landmark, so that what is proposed here is more complementary to the existing landmark. I think as far as having two buildings on the site, that is possible because of where they're situated, and the fact that this particular landmark is on its site is not in a especially landscape setting that would mean, that reducing the backyard would really diminish the site. So I think the site can be reduced at the back so as to permit the construction of houses. But I agree with Commissioner Goldblum that the landscaping is critically important in terms of masking and making the setting, let's say all the vegetation in front of the house is cleared away so you can really see it well from Clove Road, then you would want to have the back, fully landscaped in a way that you don't see these other houses in back of the structure. And that is happening right now with what was proposed. Obviously, we don't completely dictate in the future what landscaping will be there, but I agree that some mature trees would be extremely desirable for the entire proposal at the back of the site, so as to enhance the setting of the landmark. So how can these houses complement the landmark, and how can some proposed landscaping at the rear further enhance the setting? That's what I would recommend. And yeah, we're not there at this point. So
All right,
okay.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for your thoughtful comments. And so I think this was a good first discussion. This is going to be a process. It's going to take a little bit of time to work through it. And I think that there is, by some commissioners, some willingness to consider two houses on the landmark site. But I think that, as you've heard, you really need to study the relationship of those two new buildings to the individual landmark through their design and materials, their siting, and their landscaping. And there've been a number of suggestions here that you can use to start, and the staff will also be available to continue to help you develop it. And we'll see you back when you've had an opportunity to work on it some more. And commissioners, I know that sometimes it's hard to really visualize a site you're not familiar with. And I know these renderings are not the kind of renderings that you're used to seeing. So if anyone does want to make a site visit, we can, if there's a group of us, we can coordinate that and get transportation. And we maybe also, when we come back, show a little bit of a sort of a small presentation on some of the other developments that we've approved on landmark sites for other individual landmarks, particularly on Staten Island, just to give the commissioners a sense of how those were approached and how those site conditions differ or may be similar. All right, so we'll take no action, and we'll see you back when you're ready. And we're gonna, boy, okay, so we are well behind. So we're gonna break for lunch now. We'll come back at 1:50 and we will resume with public hearing item number 1 at that time. So we'll ask all members of the public who are in the Zoom meeting to voluntarily exit the Zoom meeting at this time so that you don't have difficulties should you wish to return that might arise if we remove you from the Zoom meeting. Commissioners, you just need to turn your audio and video off, and we'll see everybody at 1:50.